Order. Welcome to meeting number 25 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, so you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking of photos of the screen are not permitted. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and concern with public health, the recommendations made by public health to all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain a 2-meter physical distance. You must wear a medical mask when circulating in the room, and it's also highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times, including when you're seated. You must remain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizer at the room entrance. And as the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting. And I thank the members in advance for their cooperation. And I'm sure Justin will help me out with being able to maintain those rules. As for those participating virtually, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for the meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor English or French. With the latest Zoom version, you may now speak in the language of your choice without the need to select the corresponding language channel each time you switch. You will also notice that the platform's raise hand function is easily accessible at the bottom of the screen. For members participating in person, just proceed as you usually would when the meeting is in whole proceeding in person. And before speaking, wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click the microphone icon to unmute yourself. And for those in the room, your microphone will be controlled by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. And with regard to a speaking list, the clerk and I will try to keep a consolidated list since we do have people in the room as well. You guys know the drill, just unmute yourself, say you have a point of order. I'm sure there will be quite a few today. And then we'll maintain a speakers list in the toolbar and the one in person. Before we start, just a couple of questions and we will get onto the issue that is first at hand, which is the witnesses for prorogation. But I did want to say that we did have the estimates come forward, so we have some time for the estimates, and that would be due back in May at some point. Justin, when are the estimates exactly due back? So everyone has a frame of reference?
It is May, and I'll find this precise date for you and I'll pass it on to the committee.
Okay. And then I wanted to state that there has been a standing orders debate that's taken place in the House as well. And Andre, I had a question for you as to when you anticipate. Usually you prepare a document for this committee regarding the standing order debate. Is that something we could look forward to in the near future?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Laurence and I had not yet turned our attention to doing that. We were sort of waiting to see what the committee's views were and when the standing order study would follow in the sequence of work that the committee would like to undertake.
Okay, and there's no just a reminder for myself, really. Even there's no time frame for that, right? The time frame is only for the debate to occur in the House, but not for our review, right? Correct? Okay. And then one piece before we get started, there was a budget that I think it would be best if we were able to pass that budget at the beginning of the meeting before we start so that we can make payment for the headphones used by witnesses and the cost of the lines. I believe that was circulated to everyone. If you haven't taken a quick look, please open that up. And I just wanted to see if there was consensus from everyone to adopt this budget. Yep, okay, I see nodding. All right, Justin, is that good for you?
That'll do it, thanks.
Okay. All right. Now I see some hands up, and hold on. Let me just see the order. Ms. Vecchio, go ahead.
Thanks very much. And this is an important day that we have today because I think we're going to be starting to talk more about the prorogation study. And I know that we've had a great assortment of different witnesses that have come in and have provided a great scholarly and academic view. But as many of them have indicated, and as our motion had indicated previously, there is really ultimately a few people that we need to hear from, and that would be the people who have had put forward the prorogation and the Prime Minister himself. So I would like to move this motion, another motion. I know that Justin should have just received perhaps this motion to
I've
share
just
with
sent
everybody.
it out.
Amazing. It's kind of reiterating what it is. It's reiterating our point in the first place and our original motion. And so I just will read it into the record. That in respect to the committee's study of the government's reasons for the prorogation of Parliament in August of 2020, that the committee, A, renew the invitation issued to the Prime Minister to appear before the committee, provided that he does not agree within 1 week of the adoption of this motion, to appear for at least 3 hours. The chair shall be instructed to report to the House with a recommendation that this committee should be empowered to order his appearance from time to time. B, renew the invitations issued to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, each to appear separately before the committee, provided that in respect of each of them who does not agree within 1 week of the adoption of this motion, to appear for at least 90 minutes each. The chair shall be instructed to appear to the House forthwith a recommendation that this committee be empowered to order her appearance from time to time. C, renew the invitations issued to the Honourable Bill Morneau, Katie Telford, Craig Kilberger, and Mark Kilberger, each to appear separately before the committee, provided that in respect of each of them who does not agree within 1 week of the adoption of this motion, to appear for at least 3 hours each. A summons to issue for his or her appearance before the committee at a time and time determined by the chair, but no later than 1 month following the adoption of this motion. D, renew the invitations issued to Farah Pirila-Muter and Martin Pirila-Muter to appear before the committee, provided that if they do not agree within 1 week of the adoption of this motion, to appear for at least 90 minutes. A summons to do issue for their appearance before the committee at a date and time determined by the chair, but no later than 1 month following the adoption of the motion. E, issue an order for the production of all memorandum, emails, text messages, documents, notes, or other records from the Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council office since June 25th of 2020 concerning options, plans, and preparations for the prorogation of Parliament, including polling and public opinion research used to inform the decision to prorogue Parliament, provided that these documents shall be provided to the clerk of the committee within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion. F, issue an order for the production of records of all communications between the government and any of the We Charity or its affiliated organizations, Craig Kilberger, Mark Kilberger, or Speaker Spotlight since June 25th of 2020 in respect of the prorogation of Parliament, provided that these documents shall be provided to the clerk of the committee within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion. G, issue orders to We Charity, including the affiliated organizations, Craig Kilberger, Mark Kilberger, and the Speaker Spotlight, for the production of all memoranda, emails, text messages, documents, notes, or other records since June 25th of 2020 concerning the prorogation of Parliament, provided that these documents shall be provided to the clerk of the committee within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion. And finally, H, all documents provided to the clerk of the committee in respect of paragraphs E to G shall be published on the committee's website as soon as practical upon receipt, once they are available in both official languages. So, Madam Speaker or Madam Chair, I wanted to bring this motion forward. As you know, this is ultimately where we're at in this study. We can continue to ask for academics to be here. We can continue to ask for people from across this country and across the globe to come here and give them their perspective. But ultimately, there's only one perspective we need, and that is that of the Prime Minister. You will see that in addition to the people that have been asked, just in case any of the members are asking, this is all to do with the prorogation study, and perhaps if there is information that has been provided previously to any of the witnesses that we have asked here. Was there any plan for this prorogation? This is something that we would like to look into, and as the Prime Minister himself changed the standing orders, these are things that he said he would put forward. When it comes to being accountable and transparent government, let's see it. So thank you very much for your time, Madam Chair, and I look forward to the conversation.
Okay, thank you. I'm assuming you look for, I'm not assuming, I see the motion, you're looking forward to see all these people coming, not just the Prime Minister. Because when you wrapped it up, you said you're
the motion, I've put forward the motion, and I just kind of left there was a postamble, I guess you would say. But this is the motion that I would have on there. I mean, I would prefer that we take it to a vote as soon as possible so that we can get this work done. But it is up to the members of the committee. Thank you.
Okay, should we call it to a vote? Mr. Turnbull?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I know we've received a testimony from about 12 witnesses. And yep. And I'm just wondering why, in this particular situation, we can't move to actually formulate recommendations within a report. It seems to me we've had quite a number of strong witnesses. We've heard from the government House Leader, and it certainly seems to me that that the opposition parties have had their sort of theory about why prorogation happened, and I think we all have differing opinions on this. But it seems to me, I have all of the evidence here printed out, and there's quite a it's quite a substantial package of information with really lots and lots of testimony, and we've heard from we've heard the opinions of experts, we've heard from some officials. I think the most appropriate official is the government House Leader, and Mr. Rodriguez came and answered our questions. So I'm just from my perspective, there seems to be lots of information to be starting to formulate, some recommendations from our the current witnesses that we've had. Thanks.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Ms. Petitpas-Taylor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First, I absolutely agree with Mr. Turnbull, my friend and colleague. Since the month of December, we have heard several witnesses who appeared before the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. Briefly, on December 10th, we heard from Barbara Mesmore, who is a history professor at Fraser Valley. We also heard from David Turp, who's a professor at university as well, Kathy PROC, Queen's University professor, Philippe Lagacé, a professor from Ottawa U. Yes, they are academics. However, they still gave us their opinions about this. Now, on the 28th of January, we also heard from Hugo Cyr, who is a professor at the Université du Québec in Montreal, Ian Brody, a university professor, and Laurie Turnbull, professor from Dalhousie University. Once again, these are very competent, knowledgeable people. They shared their perspectives with us, and yesterday I had the opportunity of looking at some of their testimony again, which is full of good information. So I think that we could draft some very good recommendations based on that. On the 16th of February, we heard from the Government House Leader, Mr. Rodriguez, who shared his opinion, which led to many questions that we had an opportunity to ask. I think it went very well. Mr. Alan Sutherland appeared as well, along with him, and Donald Booth. On the 18th of February, we also heard from Dwayne Bratt, once again, a professor from Mount Royal University, and Patrick Taillon, Laval University professor. Now, I realize that we don't necessarily all agree on the opinions we heard. However, given all the information that we heard from these academics and from Mr. Rodriguez, I think that we are in a very good position to begin working on recommendations. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair, and I must say that I agree with Mr. Turnbull and Ms. Taylor that we have heard from a substantial body of witnesses. Many of them hear from the Prime Minister, and to hear from the other individuals most directly involved in the circumstances leading up to the prorogation. Certainly, the government House leader was interesting in his appearance before committee last week. Although I think his testimony was undercut somewhat by his denial that the PMO frequently sends directions to committee with regards to the behavior of committee members, both in terms of filibustering and in terms directly in terms of their vote. So I think that this motion would serve this study well and would add substantially to the body of testimony that we already have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much. I guess I just want to back up for a moment and consider, why we're doing this study. And we're doing this study in part because there was a new mechanism established in the last Parliament having to do with prorogation that was based not on this particular prorogation, but a set of prorogations under the Harper government. And so this was supposed to be the thing that was going to, dissuade governments from abusing the power of prorogation. And I'm thinking of those other two prorogations and, wondering if all members of the committee would be satisfied if a study like this took place in the face of the 2008 prorogation, for instance. And Peter Van Loan, as the House Leader of the day, I believe, Peter can correct me if I'm wrong on that, I believe that's the case, had appeared here, and the Prime Minister didn't. It seems to me that would be quite dissatisfying in terms of trying to get at the root of some of the conversations that would have taken place within the government about prorogation in 2008. So I'm mindful of the fact that this is a mechanism that has a history, even though it's the first time that it's being used, and that we're setting a precedent here. And I think it would be totally unsatisfactory as a precedent that the Prime Minister didn't appear to speak directly to the issue of prorogation and the government's reasons for prorogation, given that the Prime Minister ultimately is the person who gives the advice to the Governor General on whether or not to have a prorogation. And so, if we're going to vote on this motion on a straight up and down vote, I'll certainly be voting for it. I'm open to the idea that we would vote on something that is pared down if it meant that we could get a strong unanimous support for calling the Prime Minister here. The other person that I think would be interesting from the point of view of this particular prorogation that is mentioned in this motion, which for me is another reason to support it, is the former finance minister, because the prorogation was coincident with his resignation. And from those of us on the outside looking in, it's very hard to imagine that is a coincidence, and that the former finance minister doesn't have anything to add or a part of the story to tell that would shed some light on the reasons for prorogation. So, along similar lines, I think we've heard something somewhat similar, both from Mr. Turnbull and Mr. Kent, among others now, to the effect that we have heard from a lot of academics. I don't think we need more kind of context. I think what we need is more direct information from decision makers in order to make an assessment about the nature of this particular prorogation and whether it constituted an abuse of the power. I don't think anybody is suggesting that the Prime Minister was outside of his constitutional powers to advise for a prorogation. The question is whether there was a kind of political abuse of that power, even though it was, done in accordance with constitutional convention. So how do you get at that? You can only get at that by talking to the Prime Minister and those around him at the time. And it seems to me that the Prime Minister and the former Minister of Finance are the people to talk to. So that's why I'll be supporting this motion. If members have a proposal for, paring it down so we can get closer just to those two people, that's fine by me. I think if there is a desire on the part of some members to move to a report, I'm really reticent to do that without hearing from the Prime Minister, as I say, because I think it's a bad precedent. So we'll see about that, but I don't think we're ready to move on to writing a report. If we did, I can't see doing anything but an interim report, because I don't think we can have a final report until we speak to the Prime Minister about this.
Thank you for your contribution. Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks. I appreciate the perspective of my colleagues here. I just as I think about the comments that are made, I think, this study is really designed to continue to reflect on what's already happened. And we've gathered a diversity of perspectives and opinions on that, mostly witnesses, I would suggest, that were proposed by opposition parties. We've heard from them. They've had their opinions. They've presented, to us and, shared those thoughts with us. I think, when I think about it, Mr. Blakey, I might have to disagree with you on the point you made about context, because I think in this particular case, context is everything. We're in a worldwide global pandemic. I believe staring down the barrel of likely a third wave of COVID-19 with the variants of concern that are percolating and starting to rear their heads, and we're seeing the impact of that, for example, in Newfoundland, where the election is being affected by these new variants. And I have this concern that's forward facing, that is looking at the work that this committee needs to do to, for example, pass and prepare to pass Bill C-19, and perhaps maybe even look at a pre-study on that. I think what we've seen is some delays with that, with some concurrence motions. I feel like, we need to be able to equip Elections Canada with the possibility, that an election could be called at any time, and they need to have the tools to do so. And here we are looking back, debating how many more witnesses, how many more meetings do we really need to have? I think we've got the diversity of perspective. You're going to formulate your theory and rationale with the evidence that you've heard, and we're all going to debate that and see, to my mind, how that plays out in terms of the recommendations that we'd like to make in a report moving forward. So to me, that process seems pretty substantive when you contrast it to the past, where there's been no study on prorogation, and there's been many examples of prorogation in more controversial situations than the one we're seeing here, which I think, when we look at it, there's a really good rationale. We're in a global pandemic. There was a first and second wave in between. There was naturally an opportunity to reflect on where we're going as a country and renew our sort of agenda. And to me, that just is plainly obvious to, I think, most Canadians out there. I think it's intuitive. It makes sense. And so I don't know why, we'd need to have more and more witnesses come forward when it really seems like, we've done the job of, entertaining the different theories and, speculative perspective on why prorogation happened. And we've heard directly from government's table the report. It's substantive, and which has never happened before. So that's a positive step in the right direction, I would say. I think we can all agree. And then we've heard from the government House Leader directly. Who better to give us that testimony than the government House Leader? I think that's the most appropriate person to provide us that perspective. So we've gotten that. I'm sorry if it's not, what the opposition parties are looking to prove here, but from my perspective, we've got that perspective already in two forms: in a written report and the testimony from the House Leader. So what more do we really need? What are you going to get out of having more and more witnesses come forward and basically tell you the same thing? If it's not what you want to hear, I understand, but you're like, are you really going to get anything that's that different? Because it's all consistent. It's it's a very, I think, consistent rationale for why our government took those steps and why the Prime Minister exercised that right. Thank you.
Mr. Lezon.
Mr. Lezon. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to speak to you as a new member of this committee. I've just joined this committee. I've taken the time to read everything that is available on the committee's website with respect to witness testimony. And I've looked over who has appeared. I've looked at the testimonies of the various witnesses. And as my colleagues have said, the committee has done excellent work. We got a good overview from all the witnesses, whether those be academics, professors, public servants. And as has been pointed out several times, we also heard from the government House Leader. And so from my reading, from the outside, obviously I wasn't here from the very outset, but from my perspective, I feel that I have enough in hand to be able to go ahead and work on a final report. The prorogation has been referred to over and over again, has been spoken about by several witnesses, and we have the information that we need to be able to draft a report. I would say that because of this pandemic, there are things I would like to talk about. For example, family work balance, including other topical items. We've all had to adjust. There are many members of parliament who are mothers, who are fathers, who have young children. They're at home, and so their way of working has changed substantially. And today we have to adapt to this changing reality. And many of the witnesses really opened the doors for us to the use of technology, to finding solutions, modern solutions that would allow us to, for example, review and adapt our whole elections process and others. And it will also have its application beyond the pandemic. I would also like to be able to talk about other parts of Parliament, for example, protection services. There have been threats. There have been many mental health issues within the public. Pressure is increasing. And as a committee, we have to adapt and we have to look at the entire structure. We have to look at the Parliamentary Protection Service. And I wasn't here at the time to bring forward suggestions for issues that we could examine as a committee. But I would have liked to see, for example, a review, for example, of election procedures in rural areas. And you know, elections during a pandemic were referred to by the witnesses we heard. But when you're in a rural riding, when you're in ridings like my own and like Serge Cormier's, for example, then in that case, voting sites, polling stations can be very far away from communities or far flung. And at times, it takes a lot of time to drive somewhere. Sometimes you can't necessarily drive long distances because the places along the route are closed. So these are many things that I would have liked to have an opportunity to speak about. And so personally, I think we could work together on this report. I think that the Government House leader did a good job in presenting the reasons that the government had. I think that we have an opportunity to write a fulsome report and complete it. I'm new. However, from my reading of this, I have enough information, I feel, to be able to move ahead. We've heard the speech from the throne, we heard the economic statement, and since then, two important things have happened since you began the report. There was an election in Newfoundland. There was a pandemic there. And I think as a committee, we need to quickly review, for example, Newfoundland and the election there. I think we need to adjust. And I think we also need to take into consideration the new variants. Witnesses gave us reasons why there can be prorogation, whether it's for or against prorogation. But in this specific case, a government needs to step back in order to make the right decisions when it comes to relaunching its systems. And that's exactly what the Prime Minister did. I understand that there are differences in opinion, but everything is there. And so...
Sorry, just a moment there. Who raised the point of order? Okay, Mr. Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, are you able to check the translation? MP Lauzon's, the translator and his voice are coming through at the same level. And sometimes that's if you don't have the proper button clicked on your screen.
Yeah, and that's not supposed to happen anymore either. That's what I keep getting told with the upgrades. That doesn't matter what button you select, but I don't know if that could still be an issue. I'll check on that.
I'm just wondering, yeah, if you can check with the translator. I mean, obviously, I'm very interested in what he's saying in the speech, but it's sometimes difficult to hear when both
absolutely
both voices are at the same level. So I'm just wondering, Madam Chair, if the translators might be able to check that out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Justin, can you?
Yeah, Madam Chair, that problem should have been addressed. Now, depending on the version of Zoom that members are working off of, sometimes it can still be an issue. The latest versions of Zoom should have resolved that. But if you have on your computer a prior version of Zoom, the issue may still occur, and it might require members to toggle back and forth between the English and the French.
How am I able to tell when were we supposed to download this recent? Download the later version.
Down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little globe that says interpretation.
Yes.
And if you hit that, you should be able to make a selection of the language that you want.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, I've done it the same every time. It's just this time, and I'm obviously on other committees.
Okay.
But, this time, also has both voices are at the same level. It's just difficult. It's okay. I just want to point it out. I don't know if other members are hearing the same level of voice or not.
It was I don't know if it was at the same level for me, but it was loud. It was a lot of, you had to focus really hard. So that's for sure. I can say that. Mr. Luzon, you were on the French interpretation button. You have French selected?
Oui, moi j'ai sélectionné.
Yes, I selected French on my keyboard. I could have also turned it off, I suppose, but it still would have worked for me.
Madam Chair, I'm not trying to, again, be difficult. I just thought it was a quick switch that we could fix that.
Madam Chair and Mr. Long, I'm going to have an IT ambassador reach out to Mr. Long to see what the issue might be, so that we can try to get a better, higher volume for him, so that he can hear more clearly.
Yeah, I get a high volume. It's just that both voices
are high,
very same level.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, an IT ambassador will reach out to you separately to try to address your issue.
Listen, I thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. No problem. Thanks for pointing that out. Mr. Luzon, sorry for the interruption. Of course, Mr. Long just wants to be able to hear everything you're saying, so carry on.
Well, I apologize then that not everyone can hear what I am saying. I hope that the problem will be resolved as quickly as possible. Now, I was talking about the fact that I feel, as a new member of the committee, that I've had the ability to become familiar with what has happened in the committee based on the notes that I have received from the clerk and the House. And actually, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the clerk and his team for all the work that they did, because I had to join this committee in the middle of its proceedings. And I was able to bring myself up to date very quickly thanks to the services of the clerk. So I'd like to thank him for that and for all the documents that were provided to me in French on top of that. Now, to conclude, I'd like to say that we heard from senior officials on conventions. We heard officials from the Privy Council office about conventions and prorogation, and about the fact that it's the prerogative of the Governor-General based on the advice of the Prime Minister. And so if one looks at the report, if one looks at all the dates, in August 2020, prorogation occurred. And I saw in the report that questions were asked of the witnesses about the timing. And we often heard, well, that wasn't the right timing. Well, when is the right time during a pandemic? Every week, something new happens. The first week, there was the issue of the vaccine. We were hearing about this in other countries. And then there were many events that followed. But there was no one moment, one specific date that could have been chosen for prorogation. That's what I felt when I was reading this. Each and every witness began by explaining their position on prorogation generally, and also some said it was too soon, it was too late, some said it shouldn't have happened. Those are opinions. And I agree with opinions being voiced, but they are there in the report. And so I think we can make our decisions. You know, the Prime Minister would simply come to explain what we already know. If he were to come before the committee, it would be to say, well, based on what you're asking me about the timing, well, prorogation was done when we needed to step back. Yes, it could have been done before, and it could have been done later. Do you know, it could be done today because of what's coming up. Perhaps we need to step back and talk and think about the delivery of vaccines and talk about elections in Newfoundland. talk about the variants, talk about the distribution of vaccines. You know, all these things are good reasons to take action, but the Prime Minister was elected by the public and he decided to go to the Governor General and request prorogation so that we could step back and move forward. And really, there's nothing else when you read the information that we have. Now, contrary to the previous Conservative government, well, the previous government prorogued with no explanation more than once, and we've given the reasons. You know, there was 2007, 2008, 2009, a 63-day prorogation. There was no explanation provided. It was simply a prorogation. No answers were required. We've gone further. We've been transparent. And we have been dealing with a crisis that no government has had to deal with in the past. And that is why in 2017, we brought in a change that requires of governments and all future governments to table a report in the House that provides the reasons for prorogation. We did that. And in the report, we explain the reasons. That is the testimony of the Prime Minister. Those are the reasons underlying prorogation. Now, obviously, other issues can be examined, and that's fine. I know that our committee, at the time, looked at prorogation in previous governments. If you look at the archives, you can see that other studies were done on prorogation. And there are some experts on prorogation who also spoke to us about the constitutional place of prorogation. Perhaps our committee may decide to look in greater depth at how prorogation has come about and what changes we could make in its use that may be different from its uses currently. However, that's not what we're considering now. What's important to consider now is whether or not we have recommendations to put forward regarding the prorogation that we recently went through. Committees and commissions can consider all kinds of issues. We've heard members of the opposition and of all parties discuss what they may think about the prorogation. They've been clear on what they think is the reason underlying prorogation. To them, it is clear. However, we've done a very exhaustive, comprehensive study. And so I don't know why we would need to go even further and turn this into a big show. I think that we're responsible. I think that based on the witnesses who have come forward, that we can avoid the theatrics and that we can unequivocally complete this report based on all the reasons that were provided. Madam Chair, the member for the New Democratic Party has already said on the 28th of January, at the very beginning of this study, that he feels, and it's quite clear, that the prerogative for proroguing was actually abused and that it was used to get the government out of a political crisis. So we're here to work to find solutions, to hear the government's arguments, to hear the reasons. But it appears to me that this member already arrived at his conclusion anyway, before we even got an opportunity to listen to testimony and to call expert witnesses, whether it be doctors, professors, public servants, whether it be the government house leader, Mr. Rodriguez. And so what is the intent here? You know, when I look at intentions like that are expressed clearly from a member, that his decision has already been made before even taking time to study the issue, it appears to me that actually he's come to a foregone conclusion, and therefore nothing would change in any case. Whether we heard from the Prime Minister, nothing would change at all if we were to hear the Prime Minister testify, if minds have already been made up. You've already decided that you're going to play politics. So really, this is for personal purposes, really, to continue. In fact, the Government House Leader of the Bloc Québécois at the last meeting, before we even heard from the witnesses, said that it is very clear to him that Parliament was prorogued in order to end the work of committees that were looking into the We Charity scandal. Why do we have committees to help Parliament in its work? Would you say that it's in good faith, Madam Chair, when people say what was said, for example, by the Bloc? He already indicated his position before the committee had an opportunity to work on this report. And I congratulate, actually, all these witnesses who came forward to speak. Do I feel these witnesses were asked, do you think there should have been prorogation? And the witnesses said there are always reasons for a government to prorogue. Now, is there room for opinions? Of course there's room for opinions. But when you're a member of Parliament and you're part of a committee, and someone comes before the committee to provide their assessment and information, well, personally, I think it's a very sensitive thing then to come out publicly as a member of a party or a House leader with statements that are already indicating that a decision has been made before the work of the committee has wrapped up its work. That's my reading. I had an opportunity to read the documents. This is my feeling from the outside. But if we have a public, if we have citizens who are reading the report, who are looking at the work, and if these people, like myself, have had an opportunity to look at the work that the committee has done, they need to be able to make up their minds. On the 24th of September, a Conservative member rose in the House to say this: we all know that the Prime Minister decided to prorogue Parliament because of his involvement in the We Charity scandal. So this member already said in the House that everything we had done as a committee, rather this statement was made before this committee even had an opportunity to table its work. He said it's just a distraction. So now we're telling our constituents during this crisis, while seniors are dying, while nurses and doctors are at the end of their rope, while our emergency rooms are full, while beds are full and people have run out of steam. You know, we're working hand in hand with everyone in our ridings, including Conservative ridings, Liberal ridings, New Democratic ridings. We're working with all parties, the Green Party. We're supposed to be working together during a crisis like this. And we're supposed to be providing trust and support to our constituents. We've brought forward programs that all parties participated in. They gave us their recommendations, and we added to these programs. And this ability to step back and work together has been very important because it has allowed us to move forward. It has allowed us to bring forward better adapted programs. We know what has happened with travel, for example. We're 338 MPs in the House. We're trying to make decisions as quickly as we can based on the best knowledge available. We're reading all the documents, and we're all doing this. And we're coming to decisions based on, for example, travel. There was the whole discussion about the $1,000, for example, and travelers coming back. And we have to make decisions that are unprecedented. We never had a guidebook, an instruction booklet to tell us how to get through all these steps. We had to step back, and that's what we had to do with prorogation. On October 5th, a member rose in the House and said that the only reason the Prime Minister had prorogued was to attempt to conceal what was going on. Once again, you're saying this to constituents? You're telling constituents, you're telling the public that we're trying to conceal something during the pandemic? Whether it's We Charity or other files, we have a crisis to manage. We have programs that we need to deliver to students, to workers who are losing their jobs. There has been distress amongst our seniors. Personally, as Parliamentary Secretary for Seniors, we have been in contact with seniors throughout the pandemic, throughout the country, and you can feel the distress throughout the country. You can feel the distress of seniors and in these long-term healthcare homes and the long-term healthcare homes in Quebec and throughout the country. And I can tell you that still, as we speak, we are dealing with crises inside long-term healthcare homes in Ontario. And I think that's a priority for this government. The Prime Minister has a lot of work to do in order to manage this crisis, and we need to draft a report as quickly as possible. Do you know, during the early meetings of this study, when I started reading on around December 10th, I can tell you that when I was looking, for example, at Dr. Williams' report, and I quote, he said, during the spring and over the course of the summer, we managed to flatten the curve. And on December 10th, there were hundreds of cases per day. So this was an Ontario physician. The numbers started going up again in September. So February 2021 now. And like in the other provinces, imagine at the time.
Thank you.
It's absolutely wonderful hearing from the member, but if you could just stick on the lines of the prorogation. I know that he's sharing all of the other things that we could be working on, but we have a motion on the floor. If we could just continue speaking about the motion. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I guess the members heard your comments. So to relate your comments to the motion at hand. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mrs. Vecchio. Sometimes it's all this motion, it's the enthusiasm, and everything I've told you, I must say, is linked directly with the prorogation. Because for me and for Canadians, we've never been as vulnerable as we are now, especially the elderly, in the whole history of the country. And prorogation is also part of the measures we've taken for the elderly, for the population in general. The prorogation was a very good tool to take a step back in order to work again at the problem. Everything I've told you about is directly linked to the prorogation. And at the first meetings of the committee on this study on prorogation on January 28th, 2021, the deputy for Moose Lake Centre Lanigan said in his preamble, before even asking the question to Dr. Ian Brodie, former Chief of Cabinet of the Prime Minister, that the committee is studying this on the reasons why the prorogation happened. And I just told you this is the former Chief of Cabinet of Prime Minister Harper. And he said the reasons are clear. It's very clear. It's crystal clear, and we all know why it happened. And the same MP during the last meeting on February 16th kept on showing his bias on this question and how partial he was by saying, without going to the study or anything from the committee, that it is very clear that in the committee, and he was talking on behalf of all the members, it is clear in your eyes as well, that there is only one reason why the prorogation went ahead in August. As an MP, when I read this, I tell you, right out of hand, I had to get up, take a breather, and have a glass of water. In my writing and in your writings, remember what happened in August. Remember what had happened because of the nice temperature and the good figures on COVID. We were all afraid of COVID. We knew a second wave could come, and it was very difficult for the population to go through this. When a specialist tells us that there was just one reason to go ahead with the prorogation, well, I respect the evidence given and will take it into account in our report, but I have to tell you that I'm glad I saw other comments from other witnesses saying otherwise, and saying, for instance, that it was a good thing to take a step back in order to make better decisions. To say that there was only one reason, does this MP think that prosecutors should be part of juries as well?
Just a quick point of order.
Mr. Blakey, yeah.
It's a little bit of confusion. I know the member has said that he doesn't want to spend more time talking about the We Charity scandal, but I take it from his intervention that he does. He just doesn't want to do it with witnesses that could contribute meaningful information about the nature of the prorogation decision.
Is this really a point of order or just debate?
Well, that's of course for you to decide, Madam Chair.
I think that since seeing as you have your hand up, you will get your chance to make your reflections known to the members' comments. Carry on, Mr. Luzon.
In my sense, in my opinion, this position is ridiculous. I've read this, and I'd be very happy to have a strong debate with some of those witnesses or the MPs from the other side. But I think that we should give the benefit of the doubt to those who made this decision. So the MP said there was only one reason for the prorogation, and I think that the minutes will show that he was referring to the prorogation. There was just one single reason, and it is surprising that this member and other members from the opposition and his party can sit here and say that they want to study prorogation and get to the bottom of it. To shed light on what? It seems like they have already made their decision. Some people have made up their minds before the study started. But still, we did have some witnesses, some very good witnesses, and we have gone through 12 witnesses who were partisan or not. We listened to them, we could ask good questions, and we have a good democratic system, and we have for each party an equal number of minutes to ask such questions. I think that we have had good evidence, and this is why I think that today we could produce a complete report. Just so everybody remembers, this member I was talking about often gives arguments against the government with a lot of energy or furor, and he's done so before my own eyes, and he says he's sorry that in 2010 he had presented a completely opposite argument. I'm sorry to say, in 2010 he was of a different opinion apparently, and now we are very sorry. At the time he was in Regina Lambston Lake Center, and in 2010 in this committee, on a similar study, when the Conservative government had prorogated Parliament, he had said, and we can see that he has a lot of experience as an MP because he was there already in 2010, and I was just a municipal councillor then. He said that the Conservative government had prorogated Parliament because, and I'm quoting, a common thing, that it's a routine thing. Third time for the Conservatives, just once by the Liberals, and in the latter case in an international sanitary crisis. And he said a routine thing. And he gave examples, and other members of the opposition are giving examples today, and they are saying that it is an abuse of Parliament. What we're doing today is that we're trying to show that it is an abuse, and we always forget the pandemic aspect. And this bothers me. As a human, when I hear things like the prorogation was done for no reason, for nothing, as if there had been no pandemic, as if we didn't need to think about things, when we're preparing a speech from the throne, it takes a lot of work, and we're forgetting that here. But what I have heard in the committee is that we could have a 2-day prorogation, just spit out a speech from the throne. It doesn't work like that. It takes days and weeks of work. We have to use a lot of public servants from the Prime Minister's office, from all the departments. Lots of consultations have to go on. It's a lot of work preparing a speech from the throne. And to go through with a prorogation like that, of course, it's not because everybody's going on vacation. 6 weeks are not 6 weeks of vacations. It's 6 weeks of very intensive work looking at each measure that has been taken, each problem that we have found in the system. In my own writing, I've seen problems, and there are still problems. There is no perfect system. The prorogation has given us the time to work, to take a step back, and to come back stronger with better decisions. Now, they want us to invite more witnesses, one and another and another. This is what the motion is asking for. Why not the Pope?
Sorry, Ms. Secchio. Yes.
I just think it's important that Mr. Lauzon, as he indicated, is a new member, and that in our previous motion, that these had been agreed on unanimously by the entire committee, and that because there has not been any things received, that this is why we're re-inviting. So it's not a new list at all. These are already current, and all members of this committee did support it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lauzon. Maybe for further clarification, I can let you know that what had happened was witnesses were invited just through the subcommittee, like they would normally be invited. At some point, there was a motion brought forward with 4 witness names. One of them was the House Leader. The House Leader has attended. The other 3 were, the Prime Minister, Ms. Telford, and who was the third on that list? Morneau. Okay. The third was Morneau, and that was Ms. Secchio's motion. And at subcommittee, since they were members that were, or they were potential witnesses that were already on a list, there was consensus to go ahead and invite. And that report was presented to the committee, and the full committee had voted to go ahead and invite. And now, of course, like we are on this motion because the invitations, some invitations we have not had a response of.
Okay, merci beaucoup pour les
Thank you for those details, and thank you for the point of order, Mrs. Del Vecchio. I'm learning. I appreciate all that. So after reading this quickly, because I just received the motion today, I had to read quickly the motion because the meeting was already on. The list of witnesses is pretty exhaustive. You want to see a lot of people, the Prime Minister, the leader of the government, the Chief of Cabinet, other elected people and citizens. So there's a whole list of people. But what I can tell you is that the Prime Minister was before Canadians in a press conference, and he explained why we had to prepare for a second wave in this pandemic and why the prorogation was needed to recalibrate priorities as compared to the previous speech from the throne, and a reset was needed. So this is everything that I explained to you earlier. They really pressed on the reset button. The Prime Minister couldn't have been clearer about it. He said it to Canadians in a press conference, and he told Canadians, the Parliament, the MPs, that his priority was to have a reset and reprioritize the policies of the government because of the pandemic. And as we've said earlier, and as we've been told by academics and officials, the prorogation is precisely the mechanism needed in such a case. There is no other measure that can be used apart from a prorogation when the Prime Minister needs to go to the Governor General to have a prorogation.
So this is how one does a reset, and it's necessary in a situation like this. Previous governments have also used prorogation. And they have prorogued for much longer and for their reasons. And it strikes me that opposition members aren't understanding the full depth of the crisis that we are facing. We've just emerged from a brutal first wave, and we have a second wave, and the government is in crisis management mode. It needs to literally save as many lives as possible, support Canadians in an unprecedented crisis. That's the government's priority, and that's what needs to be considered. I raised several points at the beginning of my remarks, and we need to look at what has happened elsewhere, in other areas, and we need to look at other extremely important issues. The first COVID-19 wave, if I remember correctly, in March 2020, meant that all public health officials were telling us that they were almost 100% sure that there would be a second wave. But how could we have prorogued then? We didn't have the kind of experience that we all had in our ridings of this wave yet. We were all facing different problems. And these were all issues and factors that we needed to take into account in order to be able to improve our approach. Experts said at the very beginning of the pandemic, experts said that, yes, we could have prorogued. However, I wouldn't have had the right factors to take into account. I wouldn't have known what the best way was to adapt if we had prorogued at the very beginning. It would have been all fine and well to prorogue at the very beginning. It was fine to do it when we did, and it would be fine to do it now. What it means is that one can step back and review everything. Every time there's a change, every time there's been a change, we've had to adapt. Well, prorogation was a way to step back and adapt. You know, there are many people who are telling us it takes a long time to get through on the phones, to get advice. All this requires training. It requires resources. And prorogation means that one can make these decisions, step back, and make even better decisions.
This time, I hope you'll find that it is, in fact, a well-founded point of order. Puis
Yes,
ça serait peut-être partie de la...
Perhaps this could contribute to Mr. Lauzon's learning, and perhaps it could contribute to the committee. I'd just like to say that during the previous parliament,
in the last parliament at PROC, I think it was Scott Sims who developed...
Your volume is, I can't really hear what Mr. Blakey is saying. Can everyone else hear him? The volume's just dropped. Oh, you can hear?
Maybe play with my microphone a little bit. And
I can hear.
Is that a better?
Yes.
Yeah. So in the last parliament, when there were filibusters, I think it was Liberal MP Scott Sims at the time that developed a mechanism that was accepted by this committee. I think it may already have been used in this committee, in this parliament, where once we know that members are committed to talking out a meeting, other members could be permitted to speak at the discretion of the member who has the floor without that member ceding the floor. And, you know, I think that makes for a more conversational meeting. Monsieur Lauzon has already made a number of substantive claims about the nature of this study. I'm sure certain members, myself included, would love the opportunity to respond to some of those claims. So unless the plan is for him to wrap up shortly and proceed with the discussion in the normal way, or to proceed to a vote, I just want to recall that that mechanism exists, and maybe a way for other members to address some of the substantive points that Mr. Lauzon has made.
Sure, and this came out of a time of necessity as well. In a previous parliament, Mr. Lauzon, our colleague Scott Sims, in the middle of a long discussion, had created a mechanism in which there was trust among opposition and government members, or all parties on a committee, that they could interject and make some comments and then give the floor back to the speaker that was speaking at the time. Generally, what the regular procedural rules would be is that if it's not a point of order and another member is speaking, the first member would cede the floor and no longer have their position in line. But through this method, it was a cordial way to have necessary sometimes interventions, which could maybe lead us down some type of compromise. So if you would, I guess what Mr. Blakey is suggesting is that he would like to make a few comments and still give you the floor back so that you can continue the rest of your speech, unless it's only a couple of more minutes you have. But if there's much more that you wish to say, then Mr. Blakey could just interject. And the interjection is supposed to be short, a few minutes, not a long interjection, but something that would maybe carry the conversation forward. So Mr. Lauzon, it's up to you, really. And then you would have the floor back.
Well, I do respect Mr. Blakey. However, I think that everything that I have raised is directly related to this study. I've done a lot of work to bring myself up to date. I understand your point, Mr. Blakey. What I'll do is this. I'll stop now, and I will conclude on what my reading of this situation is when others have had an opportunity to perhaps ask their questions, but I would like to come back right away.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lauzon. So we'll hear from Mr. Blakey for a short interjection, because there is a long speakers list too, and I don't want to have a whole bunch of other people put far behind because of this. But go ahead and make your points, Mr. Blakey. Hopefully they move the conversation forward.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'd like to respond to a few things that Monsieur Lauzon had to say, and then I'll end with a proposal, Madam Chair. So the first thing that I want to say is, because I know Monsieur Lauzon has made quite a big deal out of comments that members of Parliament have made about the nature of the prorogation as somehow prejudicing what I think at one point even called a commission. Of course, this is a committee study, and we're not a court of law. We are a political place, and our function primarily is a function of accountability. And an important dimension of accountability is calling decision makers to defend their decisions and to articulate the reasons for their decisions. And of course, the decision maker when it comes to prorogation is the Prime Minister. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to still want to hear from the Prime Minister. The committee has already agreed that we want to hear from the Prime Minister. So it's not like this is a new thing, or that or we didn't have some kind of agreement on that before. And I don't think our study is done until we hear from the principal decision maker in this regard. So I just want to correct the record there. I mean, I don't see my role here as that of a judge. My role here is that of an elected official that's trying to hold the government to account by getting it to explain its actions. And I'm entitled to have opinions about whether I agree with those explanations or not. And I'm entitled to go into the investigation with some opinions about what I think really happened here, for precisely the reason that I'm not a judge. And it would be inappropriate, in my view, to behave like one in this regard, because it wouldn't allow me to do the accountability work that I was elected to do. I do think that we've been called together. We've been called to work together in this crisis. That's true. I think there's a lot of evidence of that having happened. I actually think that the prorogation got in the way of that, and I was part of an effort on the part of the NDP to call for more sittings in August and September in order to deal with the looming CERB deadline. And I think it was a mistake, both from the point of view substantially on CERB policy, not to engage Parliament on that question in the lead up to the deadline of the expiration of CERB. And I think it was a mistake from the point of view of parliamentary collaboration, not to continue and even create more time within the parliamentary forum to hammer out some of those issues. And we've seen problems with the sick day program, for instance, because we didn't have the time up front to be able to look at that. So I take his point about collaboration, but I propose that prorogation is not the way to encourage parliamentary collaboration. I think that's pretty obvious on the face of it, frankly. And so those are just some things that I would offer in response to a few of the points, what I would call the more interesting points that Monsieur Lauzon has made over the past hour or so. My proposal is to recognize that there are other things that this committee could be looking at, and I do see value in addressing other topics. But as I said, I think we also have to recognize that what we're doing is precedent setting. And while Liberal members of the committee may be satisfied that they know the reasons for prorogation and that there's no value in questioning the decision maker, which in this case is the Prime Minister, I disagree. And I suspect that they may feel differently if the Prime Minister, wore a different colored tie, and that were we having this conversation in 2008 or elsewhere, they would feel it was appropriate for the Prime Minister to appear. I'm interested in establishing an appropriate precedent. So I do, if it would help move this conversation along and reach a decision that we could call on the Prime Minister alone to come and testify at this committee, I would be prepared to support that if it helps us get to a decision. If we do that and the Prime Minister is ragging the puck on his appearance, I could see myself supporting the idea that we would file an interim report with the House of Commons, provided that report expressed the committee's view, if it is the committee's view, that the report is not complete until we hear from the Prime Minister, because I think that would go a long way to establishing a precedent in the context where the Prime Minister refuses to appear, of at least making it clear that the committee thinks it's appropriate for Prime Ministers to appear in the context of these kinds of studies in the future. Of course, I'd prefer if the Prime Minister did appear, and I think it would be helpful. And I think it would show the kind of leadership in support of his own policy that he proposed in the 2015 election. But, obviously I can't make that decision for the Prime Minister. What I can do is ask for support on this committee to continue to beseech him to live up to his promise of 2015 and to set the precedent that that kind of accountability for the Prime Minister on a decision of prorogation is appropriate. So that's my proposal, Madam Chair, is that we might find a way to hasten this conversation and reach a decision if we were to move in that direction. And I leave it to committee members to weigh in on whether they think that's acceptable to them or not as a way to proceed.
Yeah, I guess it's up to the committee members and Mr. Luzon to respond since he has the floor back. If he wishes to move in that direction, but I mean, you would need the support of other members as well. So, Mr. Luzon?
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My colleague is trying to find a compromise on a motion that I really cannot change my position on. Our Prime Minister, during this time of crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a COVID crisis, and he is doing his best to do everything he can. And we have to move forward with a report to help our government and to help Canadians. Now, you said that there are topics, other issues that we should be considering. You're right, but we have a pandemic. And we have to look at ways that, for example, we can find the right work-life balance during a pandemic. And this committee is the one to look at that. And there's also the whole issue of legal structures that we have to look at. This is also extremely important. We have to look at mental health issues, for example. During the pandemic, this has become a very important issue. We all know someone who has been affected by the pandemic, who is isolated. So we have to look, for example, at the Parliamentary Protection Service. I mean, even the Prime Minister has been the target of threats. Other members also have been affected by this. And I think our committee is the one to look at these. We shouldn't just wait for something to happen and simply put off these important issues and put off working on what has happened, what happened during recent elections. And as well, I think...
Yes, yes, Ms. Vecchio?
Yeah, I'm just going to say he's well over an hour, and we continue to go right off script. We're continue to go. We have half an hour left of this, and unless he's going to concede the floor, there has not been any new information that he's provided regarding the study and regarding the motion that we're supposed to be discussing. I know that there are other members on the waiting list who would like to speak, and perhaps that we can actually get back on topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Vecchio. Sorry, I wasn't. I was taking a little break. I was just conferring with something with the clerk on some procedure, but Mr. Luzon does have the floor, and I can't really force him.
Relevance is still, it needs still to be relevant. That's all.
Okay, and I apologize again. I may not have heard what was said in the last 30 seconds, but we'll remind Mr. Luzon to stay on the point of the motion. Thank you.
Wait.
Thank you. Well, it is connected. It's always connected to this, but I will try to be more cautious about that. As you know, the official opposition might have liked the federal government to simply ignore the fact that there was a second wave coming, but the federal government has had to act, and it hasn't necessarily acted like other conservative governments. Now, what would have been better? Well, the Prime Minister has been responsible, has acted responsibly. He has told Canadians to restrict their contacts, restrict travel. I mean, people are still traveling, and they're still meeting up with each other. And even though we took a step back with prorogation and we made the best decisions possible and we tried to send out clear messages to our constituents and citizens, there are still people spreading the virus. He has spoken responsibly. He has called on Canadians to restrict their contacts. The Prime Minister tried to save Christmas. Christmas is an important celebration. But it had to happen. The prorogation required us to step back. There were people who were laughing at his national address. They were saying he was being alarmist and useless. And we were accused of fear-mongering. But look, there have been thousands of deaths. So there's been a study on prorogation, and I read it. And I've read the testimony, and I heard witnesses recently. I also read the early testimonies from everyone. I heard the government house leader. And Madam Chair, I understand that from what I've seen, there can be partisanship within this committee. And they have their way of looking at this. They have their reading on it. However, there are limits. And we need to be able to work together. We need to be able to do something new. And I'm a team guy. I've always been a team guy. And I would just like to say one last thing before I give over the floor. A former Conservative member from Middlesex, London, said that prorogation is part of a separation of powers. It provides the Crown with a way of reacting to changing circumstances. Well, this is about the biggest change you could see here with COVID. We've had to vote remotely, and we've had a serious economic crisis, a global crisis. And there have to be new priorities in the speech from the throne. A global pandemic has changed the lives of billions of people. So that's not just a small change in circumstance. If that's not a change, I don't know what is. So I say to the members of the opposition, we need to work together. We need to move forward. We need to draft this report, and I will give my colleagues an opportunity to speak. I thank you, and I will take the floor again if necessary later.
Thank you, Mr. Luzon. And I just wanted to, just for the committee's information too, because I know procedurally that things can get a little, there could be a lot of questions. What I was trying to decipher is when Mr. Blakey had made his brief interjection, he was suggesting, he was making some suggestions to come to a compromise, and I was wanting to just, my thinking on that is that you can only, if you are to make a formal amendment to any motion, then that would have to be on when it's your formal turn to speak and when you have the floor. And if through consensus, the committee continues to use the SIMS protocol through this discussion, then I just wanted to make it clear that the SIMS protocol is only to be used for a very brief interjection and not to move anything formally or any of that stuff that you would actually do when you have the floor through the proper procedural, mechanisms when it is your turn on the list. So that's just a reminder, because it's something that's not codified or in the formal rules of procedure, but something this committee has been doing for some time before this Parliament. And I know that there's a lot of new members too, so I just wanted to give more clarification on that. And we would only be using such a mechanism for brief interjections if there's consensus among the committee as well. So the person that has the floor does not have to cede the floor. They also don't even have to allow for the interjection if they don't, if they don't find it valuable or don't want it. So it's more just a cordial thing, like I mentioned before. Mr. Therrien.
He's on mute, Madam Chair.
Oh, he just got off. Could you repeat yourself, Monsieur Therrien? You've been on mute. No, perhaps try your
Vérifiez
button.
votre appareil sur votre...
Check your device.
We still can't hear you.
Monsieur Therrien, est-ce que...
Et là, ça va?
Oui.
Can you all hear me? Yes, good. Well, I don't want to repeat everything that was said. I just want to come back to the motion. We think that this is a very interesting motion. We're talking, I think, more about Prime Minister Trudeau's appearance. There are many experts who said that in order to be able to speak about prorogation this summer, the appearance of the Prime Minister would have been important. So I think that this motion actually will comfort those experts who came before us and suggested that the Prime Minister appear before the committee. Now, obviously, the Liberals are going to say that the Government House Leader can answer all those questions. But we didn't really learn much. When I asked a question to the Leader about what happened on August 17th, he never even answered. But the number 2 in government resigned. Mr. Morneau resigned. When I asked about choosing the 18th of August, he said he didn't know. So, quite honestly, I think that the Government House Leader, and this is my reading of it, I think the Government House Leader wasn't really able to understand what was happening in his government, or maybe he didn't want to talk about it. When I asked him why not prorogue on the 18th of September, and Mr. Lauzon referred to this, well, he said it takes time to prepare to prorogue, etc. So we thought it was a bit of a strange question. However, the experts who came before us, when asked the same question, said absolutely, he could have prorogued on September 18th. It has been done, it can be done, and perhaps it would even have been appropriate, given the circumstances, given that we were in a pandemic and there were difficult decisions to make. And Mr. Taillon had said that we couldn't just break up a parliamentary toolbox in order to face the crisis that we were facing. So if we want to really hear what was said before this committee and use what was said, I think that the Prime Minister should pay us a visit and answer our questions. So we in the Bloc Québécois agree with the motion, and we hope that it will be passed.
Okay, thank you for your input, Mr. Therrien. We know where you stand. Ms. Petitpas-Taylor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today, Mr. Therrien didn't have to use the interpretation services much because most this has been happening in French. And so it's nice that he has a break. Now, there are many Canadians listening to us. And over the weekend, I had the opportunity to speak to hundreds of constituents in my riding in Moncton River Dieppe. And about every month, I touch base with them in order to see how they're feeling, specifically because of the pandemic. This is something I started doing a few months ago. And my constituents feel very positive about this because they feel heard and they feel that we're listening to their concerns. I often get questions from my constituents. They told me, for example, that they were so pleased that the various levels of governments and the various parties seem to be working well to manage the crisis. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is always in agreement, but my constituents have told me that they expect us as elected MPs to work together, to work closely together, to bring in good programs to help them. I did hear concerns, as I said, but I didn't hear about prorogation and about what we're discussing now. This is still an important study. I agree with that. And we did hear from a good dozen witnesses. But when we think about and consider the priorities of our constituents, in fact, they want to know what MPs are doing to help them during this global pandemic. In Canada, already 800,000 Canadians have had a positive test. That's a huge number. And we have worked so hard to bring in programs. And I think Canadians want us to continue. They want to see us working closely with each other. The Procedure and House Affairs Committee is a very important committee. And I've had the opportunity to sit here for at least a year. Actually, in the first year I was here. And I've had an opportunity to see how important their work is. Once again, I think a lot of work has been done on prorogation, and I think we're ready to make recommendations. The reason I'm saying this, that we're ready to move on to recommendations, is this. I'm a little worried that, in fact, the opposition has already decided what their positions are. My colleague, Mr. Lauzon, who speaks so articulately, has given us various quotes from people and has spoken eloquently. I myself looked at what other members said. I see the member for Vancouver Kingsway said,
Health critic for the NDP, I want to register my deep objection to the unnecessary and politically motivated prorogation, which was done transparently to cut off committee examination into various political scandals of the Liberal government, including the We matter. Puis je ferme la citation.
End of quote. So once again, one can see that there was already an opinion formed. I have considerable respect for Mr. Blakey, the member for Elmwood Transcona, who said this. He said this on January 28th, and I quote,
It's clear for a lot of us that the prerogative for prorogation was abused and was used to get the government out of a political crisis, which I don't think is the legitimate use of that, end quote. Fait encore une fois, je suis inquiète que...
So once again, I'm worried that there was a predetermined position. And so what I'm wondering is, what actually is the intent when it comes to calling other witnesses before this committee? I think it's important to continue working together. I think PROC has done excellent work over the past while, and I'm convinced that we will continue to be able to work together. Madam Chair, I'll try not to take up too much time because I know there are many people who want to speak. However, when I was preparing for this meeting, I had a few thoughts that I thought I should share with my committee colleagues and with all Canadians. First, I want my colleagues to think about precedents when it comes to calling witnesses and requesting documents. I know that when you're a member of the opposition, you're always looking for new, creative ways to attempt to make sure there's accountability on the part of the government. And so we need to use parliamentary procedure, yes, and any tools that are available in order to hold the government to account. But Madam Chair, I believe you were with me in our first year at PROC. And at one of those first meetings, there was a member, Mr. Christopherson, a gentleman I highly respect, and he started speaking. I think he spoke for about 2 hours at the committee. I was a new member, and I really didn't understand what was happening.
First meeting.
J'étais vraiment émue puis vraiment un peu traumatisée.
I must say I was a little traumatized at the time. But I did understand that these are tools that are part of our toolbox that we can all use. And I hold Mr. Christopherson in high esteem. I was always interested in what he had to say. But once again, it has to be said that the opposition members have tools at their disposal. It's acceptable. And it's something that has been done since the very beginning of the Westminster model of Parliament. But in terms of our work, there are limits. At least what was true until 2020 was that the Prime Minister only appears before committees in very rare and exceptional circumstances as a sign of openness and transparency. Mr. Trudeau allow me to recall, appeared before the Finance Committee in August 2020. Before then, a Prime Minister only appeared in a handful of circumstances. This Prime Minister testified, and he stayed there for a year and a half. He didn't just do a quick visit. He answered all the questions that were asked by members on that committee. So what I find a little worrisome in this debate today with respect to inviting the Prime Minister is that if members on the other side truly wanted the Prime Minister to talk about prorogation, there would at least be some relevance in that motion. You know, not long ago, we heard the government House leader in the House of Commons, and he was invited here, and he spoke to the issue of prorogation. Mr. Rodriguez spent at least an hour with us, and once again, he answered all the questions. Perhaps we don't always agree with the answers that we get, but he was frank, and he shared all the information with us. Mr. Rodriguez spoke about the reasons underlying prorogation, and in terms of other questions with respect to government policy, we've heard the Prime Minister speak in various circumstances. But how often has the Prime Minister appeared before committees on issues related to the Privy Council office? Well, I did some research, and I don't think it has actually happened. So we have colleagues from the opposition who want to call the Prime Minister before the committee today to speak about the We charity. We all know that that's what they're trying to do. And we all know why they want to do it during this prorogation study. Relevance is a problem. They've already tried this in other committees. They've tried to draw a line between the We charity affair and all aspects of government operations and our response to COVID-19. The Conservative Party tried these theatrics during the second session of the 43rd Parliament. So they've tried to bring up the We charity during a prorogation study. Now we feel and we felt that this was inappropriate.
Now, the colleagues opposite are continuing to say that this isn't the case. And once again, There have been quotes made here, repeated by several members of various parties. However, all that we have to do is look at the witnesses that they would like to call, and the situation becomes obvious. The Prime Minister, Ms. Telford, these individuals have already appeared before the Finance Committee. And in the case of Minister Chegar and Ms. Telford, let's not forget that the witnesses appeared not for half an hour, not for an hour, not for 90 minutes. They appeared for a full 2 hours. 2 hours of testimony, and the questions were difficult, but they answered all of the questions put to them. Throughout the questioning, time and time again, the theories put forward by other members were rejected. Mr. Cooper tried with Ms. Telford, and he fell flat. Why? Because there was nothing there. These theories, according to which the Prime Minister and his family were involved in granting the program to We Charity, was clearly refuted, and it's false. Time and time again, the Finance Committee, as well as government operations, made attempts to try to keep the We Charities story alive in the eyes of Canadians and the media. However, no one was buying what the Conservatives and their opposition allies were selling. Frankly, Madam Chair, Canadians know better. They saw these tactics, these political tactics, for what they were, and they quickly moved on to something else. They wanted a government that was serious, interested in them, and interested in helping them through the pandemic. And Madam Chair, that's exactly what we did. Who could have imagined a year ago that we'd be in this situation today? Look at the past year. The year was clearly unbelievable. I know that last March, when we left Ottawa, not many of us even knew what COVID-19 was. And now we know all about the vocabulary that is used regularly. Who was thinking about social distancing then, about rigorous hand washing, etc.? All of that changed. But Canadians are expecting from us what we've done. We've put in place programs to help them, and we're going to continue to ensure that we're there to help them during the pandemic and beyond. After the pandemic, I know, and I stated it earlier, I talked to several of my fellow citizens in my riding last week, and what were they talking about? Vaccination. They want to make sure that their parents, that the elderly will be vaccinated. They talked about the financial assistance that the government has established to help SMEs. They talked to me about transportation, and the list goes on. Canadians simply want to be sure that their MP and their government is there working for them. And I believe that that's what we've been able to do. And I also have something else I'd like to bring up here. During the first months of the pandemic, we saw that all parties were able to work well together. We made adjustments to the established programs. The programs had been put in place. They were put in place quickly. Maybe they weren't perfect in the beginning, but thanks to the feedback that was given, parties and members from all parties were able to work together to set up good programs to help Canadians. And that's exactly what Canadians expect of us. Despite that, here we are back here today, faced with what we're hoping will be the last effort of a desperate opposition attempting to maintain this non-story alive, keeping it alive. Allow me to be clear, Madam Chair. This motion we're debating today is nothing but another political game seeking to break through the final limits of decorum remaining for us Conservatives, and the other opposition parties are ready to unplug completely from reality and to say whatever they have to say to reach their objective. And frankly, I believe that their only objective is power. Today, colleagues opposite have supported and will continue to support the fact that it is necessary to hear the people listed in order to understand the decision to prorogue back in August 2020. It was repeated several times. But let's one final time state this. This international pandemic struck our country in March 2020, and it's continuing to ravage our population. The speech from the throne in December 2019 was simply no longer relevant once again because of the pandemic. Throughout the first wave of the pandemic, the government worked steadfastly to ensure that Canadians would have the support they needed to get through the first wave. And I think that several of us thought that the first wave was behind us and that things would improve, go well. But we were able to see that the second wave was even more virulent in August 2020, with a softening of the restrictions and some return of normalcy in the country. The government realized that the roadmap that it had established didn't at all deal with the world pandemic. Therefore, a reset was needed in order to ensure that the whole government would be prepared for the second imminent wave and for economic recovery. Prorogation was a parliamentary instrument that the government disposed of at that time in order to clean the slate to some extent and recenter the government's program. No one, not even my cynical colleagues from opposite, can maintain that the speech from the throne, the previous speech from the throne, was still relevant and that a new plan was not necessary.
Madam Chair, just looking for a little bit of clarification on what happens. I know we're approaching the end of the scheduled meeting time. Am I right that we'll be taking this up at the next meeting?
Well, Thursday's meeting, we have nothing on the agenda, so I, of course, would be in favor of putting committee business back on the agenda. Right now, if we have consensus, we can adjourn today's meeting and pick back up with the same speaker list on Thursday's meeting. However, if we don't have consensus, then I mean, it's really up to you guys. I'm waiting for signaling from you.
Sorry, Madam Chair. If we're looking for consensus on that, my thought would be that consensus would include, continuing this in public session as we've done today.
Correct. I see no reason to change, how we're having the meeting. We would just carry on, but I would adjourn if there is consensus to adjourn. Is there consensus to adjourn today's meeting?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. All right, then we will carry on, Ms. Petitpas-Taylor.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I really don't know where my colleagues from the opposition seek to go with this motion by getting the same evidence they have received somewhere else that they can read in the minutes. I think it is just for show, a political show. I think that the opposition has already made its mind on its position about the scandal affair and the prorogation, and they're looking for arguments. Still, they're looking for ways to make their story true. I have bad news for my opposition colleagues, unfortunately. The public doesn't believe that the loyal opposition of Her Majesty is really studying this in the public interest. The public believes that the goal of this motion is to promote the political goals of the Conservative Party and other opposition parties. So the truth is, why should those witnesses come if the opposition has already made its mind about what it is they're going to say? The evidence received by the committee on this topic was very clear. The officials, the politicians, as well as the constitutionalists are all in agreement. The power to prorogue Parliament is in the hands of the Prime Minister only. It is a political decision. There's nothing bad about it because the government is elected on its political views, and its program, the government's program, is political too. So it is logical that the reset of the government agenda be a political decision, and this is exactly what the Prime Minister has done. Our constitutional conventions give the power to prorogue Parliament to the Governor in Council, and this is a power that is used on the advice of the Prime Minister, the same as for the elections or picking ministers.
Yes, Tom?
Thank you, and I apologize, Jeanette, for interrupting. However, I would just point out to my colleague, Jeanette, that I believe, although I'm not certain of this, but if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, I believe if she or any one of her colleagues who have the floor would move for adjournment, she would probably find that a vote to adjourn would be carried. But that's just my opinion. And of course, I do not have the floor, so I'll let her make her best judgment call.
But you must have great intuition. I know you were a former chair of this committee as well. So thank you. Ms. Petitpas-Taylor, the floor is yours.
My only question, Madam Chair, is if that is the case, I certainly want to make sure that I will still have the floor at the next meeting.
Yeah, what could be done is if a member were to move to adjourn, what I could do is commit to putting committee business back on the schedule for Thursday and carrying forward with our current speakers list.
And if
so
I
this
could,
motion, this particular motion would be back on the floor. Sorry, I think Mr. Blakey was first, and go ahead.
Well,
Mr.
just
Blakey.
to say, if we're on a point of order, I mean, I think what's happening here is a little awkward. If members aren't prepared to come to some kind of agreement as a committee to adjourn the meeting, then I don't know who's going to vote for adjournment. Like, I think either the committee should get to the point where we agree we're coming back to this next day, in which case there is no point in carrying on. If we can do that as a committee by consensus. But if there's members who think we should continue to sit around the table when we have a scheduled time to deal with this next time, then I guess we'll continue to sit around the table. I think if we're all mature adults here and we have a next scheduled meeting, and there seems to be from a number of sides now in the meeting a desire to adjourn, we should just agree on that rather than having a non-debatable motion where a vote is going to be forced. And I think members may be surprised by the outcome. They may not get the adjournment they're expecting.
Well, last time I posed this question, we didn't have consensus because, at least one vocal member did not provide consensus. I don't know if there were maybe non-vocal members that felt the same way. So the only way we could move forward is I could ask again. I could ask again whether we have consensus or somebody could move the motion. So I'm willing to ask again whether we have consensus so it is clear. Do we have consensus to adjourn today's meeting and resume on Thursday? I'm seeing nodding in the negative from Madame Normandin, so it does not seem we have
Madame la Présidente?
Yes, Mr. Lauzon.
Mr. Lauzon. Well, at this point, I think it is important to go with a motion, and this is my motion, that this meeting be adjourned and that this discussion go on at the next scheduled meeting. Monsieur le greffier, pourriez-vous nous aider pour une mise aux voix là-dessus? J'invoque le règlement. On ne peut pas présenter une motion pendant un rappel au règlement.
So you have to check the record. I didn't say point of order. I only say, Madam Chair, can I propose a motion?
Okay.
Which you cannot do.
Check the record.
One moment.
If I could
have.
And the second time it was.
Just
Madam
one
Chair.
moment. One moment, Mr. Nader. You are correct. The floor still goes back to Ms. Petitpas-Taylor, and we can resume.
Madam, wondering if it's possible for me to perhaps move to adjourn, and
Yes, it is.
and so I will move that motion. I'll move the motion for adjournment.
Okay. All right, we're good. We will take a vote, and Mr. Vabe will help us with that.
The question is on the committee shall now be adjourned. Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Oui.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier.
Wait.
Ms. Vecchio.
No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Kent.
No.
Mr. Lakiski.
No.
Monsieur Terry, no, pardon, Madame Normandin.
No.
Mr. Blakey.
No.
Madam Chair, motion to adjourn the meeting is defeated.
Okay. Guess your intuition wasn't that good, Mr. Lukiski. Perhaps not even good enough to know what your next move was. Okay, well then, Ms. Petitpas-Taylor, you have the floor, and you can resume.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm happy to go on giving you my thoughts about this issue. So let's go. Our constitutional conventions give the power to prorogue to the Governor General in Council, that is, on the advice of the Prime Minister, to be clear, as is the case for elections and the selection of ministers. All this is the prerogative of the Prime Minister. There's nothing wrong or inappropriate in there, and I'm convinced that the Conservatives will agree with me on that. At least they will agree when they are in power. The opposition can draw conclusions on what happens between prorogation and thrown first the speech to twist perception about the situation and the facts. They have said that in the past, only 1 day or two had gone between a prorogation and the next speech from the throne. However, they know very well that it is not the case. The Conservative government prorogued for weeks on end, and let's not forget that those were weeks, not just a few days of Parliament sitting. And at the time, had justified that move, giving extraordinary circumstances because of the 2008 economic crisis. In many ways, the end of the year 2020 was much worse than the situation that the Conservatives faced in 2008. The government this time was faced with both an international pandemic, a massive pandemic, and economic problems that were enormous. None of us could have imagined what happened in the last year. It wasn't the time wasn't right to take a roadmap without first consulting and making sure that the good approach would be taken on behalf of all Canadians. The interests of Canadians are the absolute priority, the number one priority of this government throughout its mandate, and especially during the pandemic that knew no precedent. And contrary to opposition MPs, we do not waste time with political shenanigans. Last week, when I talked to the people in my riding, they told me very clearly that they knew that our government, our MPs, worked very hard to make sure that we could help them and that we could be there for them. It is obvious that it is not necessary for witnesses invited come at all. The Prime Minister, Mrs. Telford, and Mrs. Chagger have gone public, and they have gone to the Finance Committee, and we could read those. We could read this evidence. I don't know why Minister Freeland is on this list and what she had to do with the prorogation. However, the minister is now playing a key and central role in the management of this government. She is not the Prime Minister, and she didn't have to play a role in the decision to prorogue. What Canadians need in the future is that the parliamentarians focus on parliamentary tasks, on the economy, because the consequences of the pandemic are the greatest since the Second World War, and Canadians have no time to waste with political games. And once again, I'd like to repeat what I've been told over the weekend by my constituents. They want us to work together. They want us to work, basically. Canadians want a Team Canada approach to rebuild our economy. So we're willing to help. We want them to help us help them in this end. And they want all the MPs to do this together. It's not time to play political games about the WE scandal. This has been put to bed. There was a study on that, and it's time to deal with the good of Canadians. I've talked to hundreds of people in my constituents over the weekend, and nobody said a word about the WE affair. They want us to concentrate on the economy and on the help they need to manage this pandemic. And of course, they want us to focus on vaccines. So I would invite my colleagues from the opposition to withdraw that motion and to commit to work on behalf of all Canadians. I think that I will stop there for this morning. I see that many other hands have been raised, and I have lots of other stuff to say, but I think that I will say those things next time.
Sorry, I was having a problem with my mute button. It got stuck on me. Monsieur Lauzon.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Ms. Petitpas-Taylor. I think your comments were very relevant. And I just want to come back to the point you emphasized. We should be, rather than inviting the Prime Minister, be moving forward. Prorogation is why we're here today in this PROC meeting. We have to make changes. We have to provide a report to government. And that being said, the Prime Minister has spoken to the public. The Prime Minister has spoken clearly, has explained his position clearly with respect to prorogation and about a reset.
Ms. Vecchio?
Yes?
I'm just recognizing how much overtime we're going to be going. And I, with all the fear, I know that there's been lots of confusion and concern for our interpretation. I just want to make sure that reinforcements are available. We just don't want any problems for or the health and safety for all of our interpreters and such. If we could just make sure everybody's available, or just see how we're going to go around that logistics of this issue. Thank you.
Yeah, we're working on that on the back end. I mean, we just had a vote. Seems like the will of the committee is to move on. So we'll be doing that work on the back end to make sure that the will of the members can be carried on. But I do think that 2 o'clock, we may not have backup after that point. So I'm trying to figure that out, but I will give the floor back to Mr. Luzon. Thank you for bringing that up, Ms. Vecchio.
Oui, Madame Vecchio.
Ms. Vecchio, it's important that our staff have the capacity and ability to meet our needs. Their health is important. And that's why we also tabled a motion in order to continue this at the next meeting. But unfortunately, this motion was defeated, and we have to continue. The motion before us should be withdrawn. Throughout history, it has been very rare that a prime minister testifies before a committee. And one has to look at the underlying intentions for calling the prime minister before a committee. The members of the opposition already have their positions. They already had their positions. Based on what I heard in the House, based on what I heard in the testimony, based on what I heard parties express, there was already a position that was taken on this. And so what are the intentions of calling the Prime Minister forward? Well, they're vague. And today, what this means is that we're in this position. We have the documents, we have the testimonies. I have read them. I read Dr. David Williams' testimony. He's a public health officer with the Ontario government. And he said at the time, on December 10th, that intensive care units were at their maximum capacity. So this was already being said in December when we were hearing witnesses. Hospitals were already being tested in their capacity in terms of beds. Beds were no longer available in intensive care units, and the situation is the same today. Prorogation meant that we could step back, not only for our healthcare system. Do you know, tourism has also been affected. Businesses have been affected, like businesses in my riding, rural businesses. I have a riding of 41 municipalities, and they depend on very small businesses, micro businesses that have 1 or 2 employees. Oftentimes, the owner is an employee as well. So it was important to prorogue and readjust in order to be able to help ridings like my own. It was extremely important. I'd like to come back to the healthcare system. In Ontario, in Quebec, and in other provinces, these systems have been very vulnerable because people are exhausted. They're fed up with the COVID virus. They want to move on. And all one is doing is throwing fuel on the fire with a debate like this, whether it be through inviting the Prime Minister or anyone else via this motion. Do you know, we can have written testimony. We have written testimony in this committee that we can review and examine. There was a speech from the throne. There was an economic statement. There have been public meetings. The Prime Minister, on a daily basis almost, has been speaking to the public in order to provide them with updates. Now, how can you update the public on a federal system that has been so severely affected by a crisis, an unprecedented crisis in this country? This is the worst event that could have happened after the Great World Wars. And so imagine how important a prorogation is in a context like this. We're not talking about timing, about what the best date was, about how to do it, or how long a prorogation should be. We had 6 weeks to sit back and be able to come back stronger. We were able to have discussions within government with public servants who were working so very hard on this. Public service is involved with all programs. You know, there were so many organizational changes that had to be made for a pandemic. They weren't made for this pandemic. These organizations were structured for decision-making within government. And those decisions always have an effect on the public service. We know what happened, for example, with Phoenix. There was the Phoenix pay system that really just entirely short-circuited, and every decision that was made during this pandemic meant that there was going to be an additional burden on the public service, on the management of these kinds of areas. When we announce a deficit of $300 billion, well, we're talking about people here who are helping our constituents in our ridings. These are funds that are being administered by our public servants. And Ms. Veggio raised an important point earlier on. She said that we have to take care of our staff. We have to take care of our interpreters. Well, the same applies to the rest of the public service. We have to take care of our interpreters. We have to take care of all our staff who have too high a burden within the federal government right now. This pandemic is a life lesson for administration, for the government. It's a life lesson that we have to learn from and move forward from. And this motion adds nothing good except fear-mongering amongst Canadians. What we have to do is draft this report, work hard on the direction that we need to take next. We need to improve our systems. I joined PROC, and it truly was a gift in order to be able to think about and review procedures so that we can evolve and improve. We've developed modern tools. We are developing, for example, voting applications. And these kinds of things will change the world of politics. We have to change. We're chasing after change. We're using today's technology to change. And when a government prorogues, what that means is that we can make decisions. So when a prime minister prorogues, like Mr. Trudeau did, it's in order to improve. Sometimes one can't be afraid to take a step back in order to better move forward. I have learned good values throughout my career. Oftentimes there are ambiguous times, there are difficult decisions that have to be made, and sometimes what you have to do is step back.
Sure. Puis après ça, ben...
So you have to look at the big picture. And when you can do that, then you can carry on and you can move forward. The Prime Minister reassured the public. He said that some things have to change. There was, for example, an emergency benefit that then morphed into a different kind of emergency benefit. There were several programs that had been established. And before prorogation, there was a very important issue in my riding, an issue of ferries. There are 4 ferries that go back and forth between Ontario and Quebec in my riding. Nothing in the programs we brought forward helped us help that kind of business. They were already a seasonal business. Why? Because last year, there was flooding in my riding as well. And so ferries couldn't actually conduct their operations during those floods because that was during the pandemic as well. And so when you prorogue, you need to look at examples like this one, where there were exceptional circumstances. Who would have thought that flooding would have happened at the same time during a pandemic? You know, during this pandemic, you had to show your net income in order to be eligible for assistance. And that was a very necessary benefit. Well, there were ferries going back and forth between Ontario and Quebec in my riding. There's no bridge. This is a rural area. We depend on ferries. So there were 4 ferries facing this pandemic. And you can't imagine what it was like for them. With prorogation, we can take another look. I was also sending recommendations. It's not just because I'm a Liberal member and that because the Prime Minister is a Liberal that we were able to simply resolve the situation. I was facing the same grey zone that many other members of Parliament were facing during the pandemic. We can all list cases like that. And I've heard you all in the House. And we have to stand up for these people and for these cases. We were standing up in the House of Commons talking about cases in our ridings. And the minister would say, okay, we can't discuss specific cases in the House. Please send me the file. But there's no magic recipe. The government has to be able to step back in order to be able to better move forward. So when I hear that there was just one reason and that it wasn't the pandemic, well, I'm sorry. But this motion has no place in this committee if that's what you're thinking. I'm thinking like Canadians are thinking. That is that we have to be there, not to scare them. We have to be there to help them. We have to be there to provide them with benefits and with help, like we did for seniors. There were seniors in need, in financial need, who were paying more for their groceries, more for delivery of their medication. So $1,500 was given per couple of seniors in Canada. That was important. And it's very important to talk about today. We were here for seniors, and we have to be here for the public.
The mix.
Allow me to say this. I find very disappointing to hear that taking a step back to do better, to take a time out, take a specific period of time. When I read a witness who stated this, and I even asked the question to a witness, for you, what is the best or the right timing? Why are you saying that we could have prorogued in August and it would have taken care of things and we could have had prorogation for 2 days' time? Forgive me. This person was a specialist in his area, but a specialist isn't an MP on the ground with his or her constituents. It's not like an official who is trying to plan a reset for the government. It's not a minister who give his or her all night after night with meetings to try to reach the best decisions possible for us, for we MPs in our ridings. This is our life. Ministers double down. We can't count the hours they put into this. They had to take care of their constituents. They worked nonstop in order to be able to take the best decisions. And to hear people say today that the solution is simple, the solution, based on what we've heard, is that we could have prorogued earlier. I don't have a crystal ball. You don't have a crystal ball. We can't know we couldn't have known what was going to happen in our ridings. And you can't know what was going to happen to our seniors in long-term care homes. We had to send in the Red Cross, the Army. In Ontario and in Quebec, we gave assistance. We have doctors. We have nurses. We have soldiers who came to help because the system broke down during the pandemic. The healthcare system, the Canadian healthcare system, wasn't able to withstand the suffering inflicted upon people by COVID-19. And now you're saying that these aren't valid reasons to say that to prorogue a government. Well, forgive me. For me, my constituents are more important than that. And constituents with COVID-19 like we have now must be our priority. All of us, we must move forward. We have to finish our work. As a new member of the committee, I want to contribute. I'm not yet too familiar with the process and the procedure within this committee. I'm quite new here, but I know that there are things that I regret having not seen previously. There are things I would have wanted to defend harder. And in our standing committee, I would have wanted to bring solutions, to request studies, adjustments, changes to studies underway, and I promise that I'll be here more in the future. But let me say this. What matters today is to not relay negative messages to the people. They no longer need this. What we need, what people need, is reassurance, a demonstration of our solidarity amongst all parties within government. We have to show our unity with regard to the decisions we make. This week, I must defend the seniors in Canada and in Quebec for false allegations made by the Bloc leader. How do you want us to be able to devote our energy to the right things when the Bloc leader is giving false information to seniors to scare them, to frighten them? Today, this prorogation. Point of order, Madam Chair.
Ruby, your mic.
Sorry about that, guys. Go ahead. Point of order.
Je comprends que les choses.
I understand that we can sometimes get a little excited and the debates can become quite heated, but we shouldn't have non-parliamentary discourse here if we're accusing the leader of the Bloc of lying. Madam Chair, what I was saying is that the leader of the Bloc didn't say the truth, and it's true. The leader of the Bloc leader, said something that was false, the information he gave seniors, and we must denounce this. And I take full responsibility for this, Madam Chair.
Luzon.
Ceci étant dit,
that being said, it is very important to bring us back in this debate on prorogation to what matters. We have to make decisions and work together. That's the message I want to relay today. Calling upon the Prime Minister to appear and throwing oil on the fire, fuel on the fire, emphasizing yet again the importance of the exceptional appearance of the Prime Minister before a committee when we have all the necessary elements at our disposal to take the decisions in order to deliver our report. Based upon what David Williams put forward, he in Ontario is in agreement with our committee, and I retain this. He appeared before us. Elections Canada shouldn't hamper elections and should facilitate the exercise of voters' rights to vote, their legal right, no matter the needs in the area of accessibility. And this is important. This means, and I quote, that we must use technological solutions to assist voters. It is very important to discuss this and to be up to date. We could make a motion of this based solely on David Williams' statements because, in his opinion, technology has a very important role to play. And I did read an excerpt from his testimony of December 10th. Imagine what would happen in a riding like mine. It's a riding in which only 40% of residents have access to high-speed internet. We're talking about going to vote in a polling office, and you've got an hour-long car trip to get to the closest polling station in order to exercise your right to vote. How will seniors, how will people who are less autonomous and who need transportation assistance, how will they get there? There's no transit in rural areas, so we don't have transit there. You have to count upon a friend, a relative. There are people who live alone, and we must discuss the process. We must discuss the issues here that are very important for the future of this committee. We have a nice list of topics that we could discuss here in the committee. And for all of these reasons, I sincerely believe that we should reject this motion and go forward with the drafting of our report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Lauzon. Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this, and I really appreciate the comments and sentiments of my colleagues. I share them substantially. I just, I feel like the message from Mr. Lauzon there about working together is such a key, really key message for us to sort of keep in mind here. This really, from my perspective, feels like there's a partisanship and desire to win political points and really, kind of assume the conclusion of this study. And it's pretty obvious to me. I've done a little bit of reading on this and just looking back on some of the questions, the testimony of members on this committee and other members from other parties in the House. There's really quite a lot of comments that have been made that assume the conclusion of this study. And I would say, what is the point of doing a study if we don't bring the real clear, honest, good faith intentions of undertaking the study to get to, the conclusion? I mean, the conclusion, if it's a foregone conclusion, then it seems like it's done for other purposes. And I'm sort of calling that into question. I just don't know. And I would like to say, that for the record, this committee has heard from senior officials from the Privy Council's office about the norms and conventions regarding prorogation. And they've reconfirmed for us, which we've heard from multiple witnesses, that prorogation is within the prerogative of the Governor General at the advice of the Prime Minister. And this has been consistent. We've heard this over and over and over again. Our government obviously believes and has maintained all along that, we believe in being upfront with Canadians and explaining our decisions. And, this is not the standard practice in the past. The Conservative governments have made no attempt, as far as I can tell, based on my research, why they prorogued in the past. Stephen Harper prorogued, I think it's 4 times. I'd calculated something like 181 days in his time as our prime minister. And, some of those moments were quite controversial. And certainly, I'm sure the opposition benches were rightly skeptical about some of those, and I think that's fine. But in particular, 2017, our government instituted a change that requires that all governments going forward table a report, as we know, in the House of Commons explaining the reasons for prorogation. So we got that report. So this is a major improvement from past, and I don't really hear anyone acknowledge that here we are in a pandemic. The government has prorogued. I think there's a real rational basis based on the massive full court press approach that we all took collaboratively. I think quite successfully in the early stages of the pandemic and through the first wave. And so I just say, here we are. The government has provided a detailed rationale, and instead of taking it at the merits and looking at the merits of that report, we're calling it into question. But I would say, if there was a sort of good faith attempt at doing that, then I could see myself being very supportive. And I think we've been very collaborative in the sense that we've said, okay, opposition parties want to dig further into this and do a study, and we were very willing to undertake a study. And at this point, I feel like we've sort of exhausted that study. We've got witnesses that have come forward, 12 of them, in fact. We have some substantial evidence. Perhaps it doesn't fit with what the opposition members want to try to prove that they have no evidence for. That is something that is really from what I see, is just being assumed. And of course, committees have the ability to study certain matters, and I know PROC, previously studied prorogations of former governments. But Madam Chair, my concern is this. We've already heard loud and clear from opposition members and members of all parties about what they view to be the reasons behind prorogation. They've been clear in what they perceive the reason to be, so I'm not sure what the purpose is of moving forward. We can belabor this and keep, studying and studying and studying, but there's so much other important business that we can be doing. And I believe in the role of opposition parties and the constructive relationship that we can have in a minority parliament. And I really believe that working together is extremely important. But I'm just finding it hard to sort of believe that there's good intentions here, just because there seems to be a presupposition of the conclusion. And I have many examples of this, Madam Chair. The honourable member from the NDP, I don't mean to pick on Mr. Blakey at all, but he said on January 28th, at the very beginning of this study, that he believes it is, and I quote, pretty clear that the prerogative for prorogation was abused and was used to get the government out of a political crisis. So, that showcases right there that, you're putting your opinion and belief before actually undertaking the study. You're leading with that opinion, and you're looking for evidence to support that. And the fact that you haven't got that at this point, you've gotten a whole bunch of opinions from academics, and you've heard from the House Leader. And I will note that we had the House Leader and the assistant. Let me just, here I have a lot of documents here. We had obviously the Honorable Pablo Rodriguez, the Leader of the government in the House of Commons. We also had from the Privy Council office, Alan Sutherland, Assistant Secretary to the Cabinet, Office of the Deputy Secretary to Cabinet, and Donald Booth, Director of Strategic Policy and Canadian Security to the Queen Machinery of Government. So these are two officials that, and I would just say, people had a turn to ask their questions. And I've gone through the testimony. Mr. Deltel, Mr. Thériault had 2 terms or two rounds. Mr. Blakey had 2 rounds. Mr. Nader, Mr. Lukuski, all asked very good questions of the government House Leader. We had our round. It was a fair, process. Everybody had their turn. We got the answers that the government has provided in addition to the substantive report. So, okay, so that's one, and then with regard to the officials, we had Ms. Vecchio had 2 rounds, Mr. Kent had a round, Mr. Terrian, Mr. Blakey, Mr. Nader again. I hope I didn't miss anybody, but there's been quite an opportunity here to question those officials and the government House Leader. So, and when I look at some of the other comments that individuals have made prior to getting into the study, and even how they framed their questions, most of the questions assume the conclusion that they're looking for. And so I guess what I'm asking is, like, what's the point? Is this just a political play here to, win points? And, I mean, it just seems pretty clear. Furthermore, member of the Bloc, the House Leader from the Bloc Quebecois, in the last meeting before we even heard from witnesses, said it's clear to me you prorogued Parliament, thereby putting an end to the work of the committees that were looking at the We Charity scandal. That's a quote. So I just say, Madam Chair, would you call that a good faith sort of question when you're assuming the answer that you want to hear in the question itself? I don't feel like what's a study for? A study is to explore an issue that we all think is important. This is one we've agreed with you. Okay, let's dig in further and study this. We've done that at this point, and it just seems like we've exhausted the list of witnesses. And I mean, Ms. Vecchio, like, I don't even understand why certain witnesses are in your motion. Like, I wish you could, like, tell us, why is the Minister of Finance, for example, in the motion? Like, it makes no sense to me. I really don't understand why the Honorable Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, would be in there. Obviously, all the other witnesses assume an agenda, which is to somehow link prorogation to We Charity and the things that happen. And I will note that it followed this work of the Finance and the Ethics Committee and some of the other committees. And I know that most of that work, I think, picked up basically where it left off after prorogation. So, when I kind of think about this from a really rational perspective, I go, okay, we were the honorable members of this committee sometimes claim that, this was all an attempt to shut down that committee work. Well, I'm on another standing committee, which is HUMA, and we resumed our work and put all of the motions forward again in one fairly large swoop motion that, put all those things back, on the agenda. And my understanding is that other committees largely did the same. There may be some exception, but that work continued. So, also I'd reference the Conservative member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, and Brock on September 24th, 2020, rose in the House of Commons to say that, and I quote, "The Prime Minister, we all know, decided to prorogue Parliament because of his involvement in the We Charity scandal. And that prorogation was all about distraction." Furthermore, on October 5th, the member of Selkirk Interlake, Eastman, stated that the only reason we had prorogation by the Prime Minister is the We scandal, continuing to say it was about trying to do a cover-up. So there just seems to be a deliberate attempt here to put out these statements and conclusions without any evidence. I mean, other than I think what we've heard from people, which I've hotly contested, I would say, that this, just because of the timing, that, there's really good reasons for why the government prorogued that at that time. It made sense. it made sense to reevaluate at a moment where we were in between sort of the first and second wave of COVID-19. It was a natural point at which you could reflect on, okay, how are we going to prepare for the second wave? How are we going to eventually deal with the deep economic scarring and the incredible vulnerability that Canadians have been suffering through and coming out of this? And certainly, I just see how much work we did during that time. And Mr. Blakey has claimed that we sort of took a break. And I say we didn't take a break. There was so much consultation and so much work that went into essentially, trying to evaluate where we were at as a country after this, I would call it, exhausting full court press of a major global crisis. To me, that seems very rational, and it coincides with what others have said. And there's testimony on this from, I think it was our first meeting. I can't remember the name of the person. I do have it here, but maybe I won't go there yet. I'll maybe save that one for a little bit later. But essentially, one of the many reasons that governments prorogue, I guess, throughout history, is a major shift in context, which certainly causes people to say, well, is our priorities as a government the same, and should we be reevaluating those and ensuring that we have the confidence of the House and that we're really addressing the needs of Canadians? And to me, that's responsible government. So not only have we, been more transparent than any government in history in Canada by tabling a report, undertaking a study willingly, but now we're at a juncture where, okay, the opposition parties aren't getting what they want, so they're trying to sort of bully us or force us into delays that, eventually I'm sure you want this to sort of continue. And
point of order, Madam Chair.
Ms. Vecchio.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Mr. Turnbull. And of course, we don't would delay, so we could have an option of either going to a vote, or unfortunately, I want to be ensuring that we are not adjourning just because it's QP. And if that is a decision that we look at it, that we should be suspending and returning after QP if this issue is not being voted on and settled. Thank you.
Okay. I'm having the team look at resources right now. Other committees are in play after, or have the space occupied after this meeting. So we definitely have until 2. And
we have confirmed that it should be good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Mr. Turnbull, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. At the beginning of the very first meeting of this committee's study on the government's prorogation, the member for Moose Jaw Lake Centre, Lanigan, sort of had a preamble in his question to Dr. Ian Brodie, former Prime Minister Harper's Chief of Staff, by saying that this committee is charged with the responsibility of conducting a study on the reasons why this government and the Prime Minister prorogued Parliament. Continuing in the same breath, to say, quite frankly, the reasons are crystal clear and we all know it. Again, implying that they knew what was really going on and assuming the conclusion. This same member at the last meeting held on February 16th continued to show his sort of prejudgment of this matter and his inherent bias by stating, without a study or concurrence by this committee, that it is clear to everyone in this committee, and I know it's clear to you as well, there was only one reason for prorogation being called in early August. Again, this demonstrates that there's not a good faith intention being brought to this study. It's assuming the conclusion. So again, what's the point in doing a study if and not moving forward to our recommendations if the opposition already have their minds made up? I mean, this is really what we're seeing here. You have your mind made up. So what's the point in hearing from further witnesses? it doesn't make sense to me. I think there's only one reason. Does the member think that prosecutors should also be able to sit on a jury and pre-submit their vote before an investigation starts? Seems kind of ridiculous, doesn't it? Anyway, I'd be happy to engage in some good faith debate with some of the members opposite, but they make it increasingly difficult in my mind to give me, or for me to give them the benefit of the doubt. And really, how could I? The member went on to say that there was a single reason for doing so. And by so, the record should reflect that the member is referring to prorogation. A singular reason, Mr. Chair, or Madam Chair. It is baffling that the member and other members of this party and only opposition members can sit here and say, let's study prorogation and get to the bottom of this. To the bottom of what, Madam Chair? To the bottom of what? It looks like they've already made up their minds long ago. So I think, I have so many other statements here of members that have, made claims about this over and over and over and over again, that this is something they're trying to impress in people's minds. And I would say it's merely for political points. It's trying to create a perception out there among Canadians that prorogation was done for the purpose that they want it to seem like it's done for, or it was done for. And that's just not the case. So, when you don't get the evidence that you want, do you keep searching and searching until you find what seems like it will support your theory? I mean, that's bad science, we, you haven't got what you want, I guess, and it's unfortunate, I guess, but, from your perspective, it just doesn't make sense from my perspective as to why we continue delaying other important work that we have as a committee. I have at least 3 other ideas of other studies that we could undertake. We have a list of other committee business that was provided to us in the brief in advance. And these, there's a lot of important items of business here that could really be helping, I think, Canadians right now. And so Madam Chair, I really find this motion, and first of all, I don't understand why Ms. Vecchio would want to hear from certain people in it. It doesn't make sense to me, and I think for the reasons that I've mentioned, it really assumes a conclusion that I think, it's reaching at best. It's reaching at best. So I would say I strongly oppose this motion because of the intentions with which it's been brought forward. Thank you.
Madame Normandin.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I don't plan on hogging the floor for too long. I will leave time for my colleagues, but I would like to explain my viewpoint with regard to the motion, but also in reaction to the comments of my colleagues. The MP from La Prairie has made his own comments, but we're 2 different individuals, so I'd like to quickly go through mine. I heard arguments to the effect that there are people who've already appeared before the Finance Committee, and there's no point in having them reappear in front of our committee, have them appear here, because the people who were witnesses before the Finance Committee appeared before prorogation, and we're asking them to talk to us after prorogation. So their testimony isn't to be deemed useless or pointless simply because they appeared at a different time. And it's also been said that you've already made up your mind, so why hear more witnesses? The witnesses we heard are perhaps witnesses we wanted to hear first circumstantial evidence with regard to the criterion for prorogation. In that context, they can help us have a better idea of what the conclusions of our eventual report might be. But as Ms. Petitpas-Taylor was saying, the prerogative for prorogation flows from the Prime Minister, and therefore he is the one with the reasoning behind prorogation, which is why his testimony would be relevant. People are saying, why call upon Minister Chagger, Ms. Telford? I think that you have to be willfully blind to say that the possibility of prorogation was used to hide the We Charity scandal, and it was just a screen game, and that wasn't the intention at all. But I would be uncomfortable in saying that this was a frivolous reason. So these people who were impacted upon by the We Charity scandal are very relevant witnesses, especially with regard to circumstantial evidence. And the idea of having a study on prorogation, well, I heard this and it frightened me. I heard people say, well, imagine a prorogation called upon by the Prime Minister. If that's his choice, let him do it. But Daniel Turp did appear before us, and he said that the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom did render a decision in the fall of 2019 saying that even if it's his prerogative, it's a power that has to be well framed. And the Supreme Court did state that there had been abuse of that power, and it struck down prorogation. So I believe that that is very relevant in the context of our discussion about what has just happened, but also for the future, because there are people in the Liberal Party who said that it happened 4 times with the Conservatives. And it is very relevant for the exercise of democracy that we look at this, because based on the UK Supreme Court decision, prorogation must take into account the ability of Parliament to exercise its constitutional and legislative duties. So it's very relevant to ask the question, was this prorogation legitimate? And we need criteria for the future in case there is another prorogation. So those are my comments with regard to what I've heard my colleagues state. And I now give back the floor to whoever would like to speak.
Next, we've got Mr. Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And listen, I mean, obviously, I'm a bit of a pinch hitter here, but, why can't we just do this? The committee's going to come back on Thursday on this motion. And I now move that the committee be adjourned.
Madam Chair, the question is on whether the committee should be adjourned. Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Oui.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Oui.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier.
Oui.
Ms. Vecchio.
No.
Mr. Steinley.
No.
Mr. Kent.
No.
Mr. Kent. Mr. Lakiski.
No.
Monsieur Terrien. Je m'excuse, Madame Normandin.
No.
Mr. Blakey.
No.
Madam Chair, motion defeated 5-6.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Long?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to everybody on PROC. Happy to be here. I'm happy to pinch hit. This is probably my 3rd time stepping in. I think I'll actually be back on Thursday also. And I just wanted to certainly compliment everybody on this committee for the great work that you're all doing on behalf of Canadians. I mean, obviously, we're a little bit sideways, in my opinion, right now, but the work that PROC does is certainly instrumental and vital to an effective parliament, and certainly the work all of us do on behalf of all Canadians. And certainly, Chair, we're in difficult times, and I think we've all been certainly stretched to the max. And you know, I remember coming back from Ottawa March 13th. Seems like, you know, just yesterday, but it's hard to believe it's actually been a year. It's been almost a year since we've come back, and you know, came back on March 13th, not knowing quite what to expect, not knowing how long this road would be, but certainly, you know, I look back also at a sense of pride that certainly on behalf of the constituents of St. John Ross, as their member of parliament, and my team of Jeanette Arsenault and Jody Wheaton and Kevin Collins, we stood up and we answered the bell for Canadians. And, you know, one thing that's abundantly clear, Madam Chair, is that Canadians want a government that has their backs, that is responsive to their needs and standing up for them. And certainly, it's abundantly clear to me that that's what Canadians want from their parliamentarians, their members of parliament right now. They want us to get to work on behalf of Canadians. And, you know, I want to speak on this motion before us, I mean, which proposes to bringing forward yet more witnesses for this study on the government's reasons for proroguing Parliament in August 2020. You know, certainly as my friend and colleague MP Turnbull said, you know, there's been plenty of witnesses that have come before the committee, lots of questions asked by all parliamentarians of these witnesses. And sometimes it's, you know, it's abundantly clear that, you know, some parliamentarians are looking for an outcome that they want to deter. They know what outcome they want, and they're trying to continue to ask witnesses and continue to do that and bring more witnesses in and want this to be extended to try to find the answer they want. And it's not the answer that's obviously abundantly clear. In my riding of St. John Ross, I haven't had a call, not one call, in my constituency office about this. Like my friend and colleague to the north of me by about an hour and 15 minutes, MP Pettipaw Taylor, said that I also do AMAs regularly. AMA, for those who don't know, is called Ask Me Anything. We had almost 7,000 views of our AMA last week. You know, we put it out there. Ask me anything. Let's talk about issues that are important to you. Probably had 300 questions. Was there anything about prorogation? No. You know, sometimes they call this, you know, something that's important to the bubble or to the Ottawa circle. It's not important to my constituents. My constituents are concerned about getting back to work, making sure that if their work has been delayed or canceled or they've been laid off, making sure that our government has the proper supports for them, Madam Chair. Whether it's the CERB or this, you know, CRB or expanded EI, whether you're a business and, you know, they've applied to the wage sub or the rent support or CEBA, the business loan, you know, $40,000 loan of which only $30,000 is repayable. No interest as long as you pay it back by December 22. And then we added another $20,000 on top of that. Canadians want to know that we're there for them. And Canadians want to make sure that Parliament is working well. And right now, I believe that the committee has done what it's required to more than fulfill its obligation in regard to the study. But to be honest, I'm of the belief that the opposition has moved this motion not to actually gather vital information that could decide the outcome of any report from this committee, but to yet again follow the lead of some other committees lately to try to score political points. The opposition and the Conservatives in particular have made no secret of the fact that they already knew enough about the prorogation, as they have made hundreds of statements to that effect to the media and their followers within hours of the prorogation taking effect. The opposition Conservatives have been quick to call this a cover-up. But the Conservatives cannot be too loud here. But let's take a few moments to see what the recent history of prorogation has been. I still, Madam Chair, consider myself, somewhat new to politics. Started in 2015. Had a dream to represent my community. Before that, obviously, I was part owner and president of the St. John Sea Dogs. Some of you are probably tired. I know MP Blakely heard a lot about the St. John Sea Dogs in previous committees. In our first session, I think, when we sat on ethics. Proud of that. I'm proud of the past, and certainly was proud to bring a Memorial Cup to this wonderful city. Quickest expansion team to actually ever win a Memorial Cup. We started as an expansion team in 2005 and won in 2011. So back to the motion. I do want to, again, like I said a second ago, take a few moments just to see what the recent history has been. In April through October of 2010, PROC was seized with the issue of prorogation during the time of Prime Minister Harper. Harper, who used prorogation on a regular basis, sometimes for many months. The most egregious use of prorogation was to save his political hide to prevent the opposition from moving a motion of non-confidence, as he did in 2008. I would recommend to all members of the committee to read the evidence from those meetings, as well as the report that emanated from this study. And, obviously in 2010, I was, like I said earlier, knee-deep in hockey and traveling the country with my St. John Sea Dogs hockey team. But I do remember it. I do remember how, at that point, Prime Minister Harper did prorogue with the minority government. He prorogued to avoid defeat. I remember that. I remember the talk around the country, how he used that. I would also, for the education of some members who either were not in the House at the time or were unaware of what happened, give a very brief explanation of what did happen. In 2008-2009, during the 40th Canadian Parliament, the Conservative government of the day created legitimate outrage on a national scale for the prorogation of the House. It was triggered by the expressed intention of the opposition parties, who together held a majority of seats in the House of Commons to defeat the Conservative minority government on a motion of non-confidence 6 weeks after the federal election of October 14th, 2008. The intention...
L'intention était due.
Sorry, what was that from the interpreter? Just a moment. We might need to suspend just for a minute.
Madam Chair, it looks like
we've lost interpreting.
Yeah, we'll check on that to see what's gone on with interpretation. One moment.
Okay. We'll suspend just for a minute.
Madam Chair, could
believe we were on Mr. Long. If you're ready to continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome back, everybody. I'm sure you are all waiting with bated breath for me to start this up again, and I'm happy to oblige for sure. So let me see, where was I? Is anybody able to tell me where I stopped off? Just joking. Okay.
I remember the team that you work with. That's about it.
Well, Chair, that was probably that was
just skip to the
highlight.
good part, Swain. Just skip to the good part. I keep waiting for the good part. I haven't heard it yet.
Daniel, I have a checklist here, like St. John, check. Memorial Cup, check. Anyway, at least we can laugh, eh? All right.
Well, I appreciate that you're not wasting paper by devising new checklists all the time.
Indeed, my friend, indeed. Okay, so when we left off, when the chair was good enough to give us a 10-minute recess, I was talking about me actually not even being involved in politics, but 2008, remembering then Prime Minister Harper proroguing and recalling what an uproar it was. And, he prorogued 6 weeks after a federal election. The intention to vote non-confidence arose from the government's fiscal update tabled on November 27th, 2008. It included several contentious provisions that the opposition parties rejected. The Liberal Party and MP Blakely, the New Democratic Party, reached an accord to form a minority coalition government. The Bloc Québécois agreed to provide support on confidence votes, thereby enabling the coalition a working majority in the Commons. And I do recall that, absolutely. On December 4th, 2008, then Governor General Michaëlle Jean granted Prime Minister Stephen Harper a prorogation. And before any member thinks this is not relevant to the motion before us in regard to calling witnesses, I can assure you, if you listen a little longer, you will see. The background to this is in November 28, 2008. Stephen Harper referred to the accord between the Liberals and NDP as undemocratic backroom dealing, stating that the opposition parties were overturning the results of an election a few weeks earlier in order to form a coalition that nobody voted for. The Liberals indicated that they intended to present their motion of non-confidence on December 8. The government then canceled Opposition Day, originally to be held on December 1st.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Nader?
Just curious if whether or not Mr. Long will be reading the entire Wikipedia article that he seems to be citing word for word from the 2008-2009 Canadian parliamentary dispute. And if he is just planning to recite Wikipedia, perhaps he could table it and let us get on with the voting on the resolution.
Perhaps he will like to table it, and he can probably explain. I would like to interject at this point. I know of course, you have to relate it back to the motion at hand, but there has been a lot of latitude given by many chairs, and I know Mr. Bagnall is, the previous chair to this committee, and I served quite a lot of time under his leadership, and recall Mr. Nader also reciting from many textbooks during those times. As long as he had related it back, I saw that Mr. Bagnall had allowed for such references to be made. So, all I can say, I wasn't there at the time Mr. Lukiski was chair, but I'm sure I've heard he was a very fair chair and allowed for some latitude as well. So I will allow it as long as there's a point of reference to the motion and connection made.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I certainly intend to continue with my speech. And I will add some color here and there to make sure that we bring it back to the motion, and we certainly include the relevance of what I'm saying. And, again, as a proud member, a two-time member of Parliament now, I feel like a veteran. I mean, I guess I'm in my 6th year, believe that or not. I've got a job to do. I've got a job to represent my constituents. I got a job to represent my constituents here in this riding and in Ottawa, and do the work that my constituents elected me to do, and that's to represent them. And represent them on behalf of all Canadians, and continue to be a part of making Parliament work. And a part of making Parliament work is good dialogue and good exchanges, and certainly differences of opinion and ideology. But in the end, I think everybody on this committee, and certainly all of my colleagues, want to see us move forward with things that are important to Canadians, things that Canadians care about. And I certainly know the constituents of my riding want me to represent them in a way they're proud of, and do things that help them, whether it's, like I said earlier, bring programs back from our government to help them through COVID, or infrastructure investment. But anyway, but back to my motion, Madam Chair. So I remember that. I forget where I was in the country. I believe I was somewhere I think I was in Val-d'Or or Rouyn-Noranda, when I remember Prime Minister Harper actually canceling Opposition Day, and what an outroar that was. So, he canceled that day on December 1st, and then it meant the earliest a coalition non-confidence motion could occur would be the following week, December 8th. The Conservatives hold the record in modern times on prorogation of Parliament. So let's take a quick walk back in history and see. During the 41st Parliament, the Harper government in October of 2013 shut down Parliament for 33 days to avoid questions on the Senate expense scandal, and the resulting PMO cover-up. In the 40th Parliament, the Harper government shut down the Parliament for 63 days to avoid the Afghan detainee issue. In 2008, as I mentioned earlier, the Harper Conservatives shut down Parliament to avoid a confidence vote that would have toppled the government. This shutdown lasted 53 days. And again, let's think about that. They prorogued to avoid a confidence vote. In 2007, the Harper government shut down Parliament to declare mission accomplished and 5 priorities from election, and took 32 days before bringing in a new throne speech from the throne. And after all that was done, how many times do you think Stephen Harper was before a committee to explain his reasons for prorogation? How many times? Was it 2 times? Was it 3 times? Did he go every time like this committee seems to want? No, 0. So, he didn't appear. On August 19th, Pierre Poilievre, who was, prior to his demotion, the Conservative finance critic alongside Michael Barrett, publicly stated that the prorogation was a cover-up to shut down the study in regard to We Charity. Poilievre falsely claimed that documents provided by the government were redacted to assist in this supposed cover-up. This, of course, ignoring the fact that the government House Leader's office distributed the documents to all parties, which it turned out were the only redacted in line with privacy legislation. But again, Madam Chair, the Conservatives are never ones to let facts get in the way of their arguments, and this is the case here. Prorogation, of course, did not and cannot stop a committee from resuming a study that was underway prior to prorogation, or for that matter, starting a new study on any topic within the mandate of the committee. And that is evidenced by the fact that numerous committees did and still are hearing from witnesses on the we matter. The focus is, of course, much lessened due to the fact that after hearing from all the witnesses and seeing all the documents, no, zero, none, there is no proof exists that there was any political interference by political actors in regard to choosing of We Charity to administer the agreement. I know this fact is disturbing to the opposition, who seem to love using parliamentary time and resources on chasing their tails in an attempt to smear this government and score cheap political points. But Madam Chair, the facts of this are clear. The prorogation was put in place to allow for a bit of resetting of priorities in light of the resignation of the Minister of Finance, and likely more importantly, to address issues in regard to the pandemic that members on this side believe is one, if not the most important issue facing both Parliament, the government, and the vast majority of the Canadian public. And I think all of us, Madam Chair, would agree that to be true. Look at the people that come into our constituency office. Look at the calls that we take. So, Madam Chair, I believe that this committee should get down to getting the report written and move on to study something that is actually relevant to everyday Canadians, something that everyday Canadians, our constituents, care about. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The next speaker we have is Ms. Pettipat-Taylor.
Hello, Madam Chair. I'm first of all, thank you so much, and thank you to my friend and colleague Wayne Long for his speech. I know we have an awful lot in common being in the same province, and always appreciate hearing about the sea dogs and whatever else that he has to share with us. I believe that perhaps that we could call, I would like to bring forward a motion to suspend the meeting up until next Thursday. And I would like to proceed to this Thursday coming, sorry. And I would like to proceed immediately to a vote on that.
Okay, it's a superseding motion, so I have been advised that we could move to a vote on that motion at this point. Just wanted to clarify that the timing would be this Thursday at our regular slotted 11 a.m. time slot. So go ahead, Mr. Clerk, help us with the vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question is on the question to suspend the meeting. Madame Pettipat-Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Monsieur Lauzon. Monsieur Lauzon.
Oh no, what happened?
Monsieur Lauzon, je pense votre audio ne fonctionne pas.
Oh.
I think that you're on mute.
No, we still can't hear you. Okay, he's voting for.
Okay, merci. Mr. Long.
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier.
Oui.
Ms. Vecchio.
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski.
Oui.
Mr. Kent.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Madame Normandin.
Oui.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
Madam Chair, motion adopted.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk, and thank you to all of you and your staff and to the interpreters especially. It's not easy going for that long. Thank you for accommodating the members' request to debate this issue. We really do appreciate it, and we will see you all back on Thursday at 11 a.m. Thank you.